Hello, everyone. Welcome to Global Azure Philippines edition. And today we're joining about 99 communities from 104 different locations all over the world, hosting live and hybrid events to learn Azure from the best community leaders and tech experts. My name is Marilex Benevie, and I am the organizer of Azure User Group Manila. And our community has been around for almost I think about 5 years now. Oh my God, it's been so long. And this is the third year that we are hosting Global Azure. And but this year it's a bit more special. We have finally managed to host an in-person event hosted by Microsoft Philippines. And so right now, my co-organizer Joanna Hipolito is running a parallel event at Microsoft together with some awesome lineup of speakers and community members. And we have had a huge interest for this event, and a lot of them are students and newcomers who are super enthusiastic to learn Azure. And I'm so inspired, and it makes me think back to the time that I was starting with Azure myself, and I know how it can be both super fun and challenging to absorb all this wealth of knowledge. And that's why joining a community like Azure User Group Manila and attending community-led events like Global Azure, there's a lot of community events out there all over the world that you can join too, but it just makes it a lot easier to learn Azure, but also it makes it absolutely more fun and rewarding. And that's why I'm so excited today. A little bit jealous actually that I can't be there in person in Manila because I was just there a couple of weeks ago, I think 2 weeks ago, and I was just enjoying the sun. If you can see my tan, but unfortunately I can't stay for long. So I'm just happy and thankful for my co-organizer Joanna and the rest of the team for arranging everything there, and I hope they are enjoying. Hello to you there. And if you also want to watch the in-person event but somehow couldn't make it physically in Makati or Microsoft Philippines is, there is an ongoing Teams call that you can join to. So you get to also watch them live, hopefully. So you can just go to our meetup page, go to meetup.com and search for Azure User Group Manila. And under the event for Global Azure, there is a link to the Teams channel. I think I'm also going to post that in the comments section. But if you're also really interested in hearing the live stream sessions that we have, so we have parallel tracks, the in person and the live stream, uh, then just stay with me, grab a cup of your favorite drink, hang out with me for the next 2, 3 hours, and we will be joined by my favorite people in the community, my longtime friends from Azure community, who my fellow Azure MVPs. Keeping me company on screen so I don't feel so boxed in today. And we really have a great agenda. So, first off, we have Brian talking about security in Azure Functions using API management. And then later today, Penny, Michael, John Pena is also joining me talking about Azure Open AI services, which is really a hot topic these days. And then later this afternoon, our guest, Jayu Kamar, will be talking about Azure Identity Management, also to secure Azure functions. So hope you enjoy our live stream and stay with us and stay tuned. And here's my savior now. I'm going to invite him on stage. Brian, I'll just add you on stream.
Hey Merlug.
Hey, how's it
Hey,
going?
good. It's been crazy since moving here in Australia. Uh, Very cold at the moment, but everything's
Oh,
good. Yeah,
Oh, I'm so happy for you. I'm so happy. Big move.
thank
Yeah.
you,
How long have
thank
you
you.
been there now? How long have you been living there?
Almost 3 months already, so I'm just been settling in. Currently, well, just ended my work day for today, but really enjoying my stay here along with my partner. So everything's good.
Okay, I'm pretty sure. So, did you get to meet Michael or Penny, one of our
Oh,
speakers, for
yeah.
those who were attending? Yeah.
Well, first day I arrived here, or we arrived here, we already meet up, and so I've also met some of the guys here. I've only been talking to online, in the community, and yeah, it's been a great basically I feel really happy that I'm able to meet them now, get to organize events with them and actually attend in-person events here in Sydney. So yeah.
That's really great. So I guess they also have a very thriving community. I was just also there in Sydney in October,
Oh
also
yeah.
attending the NDC Sydney. So yeah, too bad I didn't get to meet Penny, and then you weren't there yet. So, but I hope that one day we can all meet up in person
Yeah.
and do this in person, and that's why I'm really happy that we still get to do this.
Mm,
But a little bit jealous that I can't join Microsoft
yeah.
Philippines, where there are like a lot of people have signed up. So, and we even have waiting lists and lots of students. So I
Mm,
hope there will be a few no shows, so that it's going to be a really fun event. And one of the other Azure MVPs, Pio, he's also joining by two other speakers, Leslie and also Ridge One, who is also an Azure MVP. So that's going to be a really fun event. But
yeah.
you and I were here, so we're
Yeah.
also going to make the live stream enlightening, and hope people will learn a lot. As always, from you, one of the best people in the community, especially in the Azure Filipino Azure community. So thank you so much, Ryan. I know it must have been a very big move, and you're busy and you're settling there in Sydney, but you still take time to join us. So I appreciate
No,
it.
no, no. Appreciate it as well for inviting me, and also, really miss the Philippine community as well. As you mentioned, they're really thriving at the moment, and I feel like I just wanted to visit maybe once, at least once a year. So maybe in the next time, I can also uh organize an event or join an event in the Philippines. But yeah, yep,
Yeah, we'll definitely coordinate. Maybe at some point a conference where we get to invite all the other Filipino MVPs all over the world. There are quite a few now, and then put them all together in the same location in Manila or somewhere else in the Philippines, and then really get to be with the with our local community there. So,
yeah,
yeah, maybe let's cross our fingers that we get to do that soon.
yeah. I'm hoping.
So,
All right.
yeah, so thank you so much, and looking forward to your topic for today.
Awesome.
That's about
Okay.
security. So yeah,
All
I'll
right.
give you the stage.
I'll be sharing my screen now. Give me a second. Here we go. Can you see my screen now? Yep.
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. All right. So, good evening, everyone. Hopefully, you guys are having a great time. Having a great day so far. Welcome to Global Azure 2023. I hope you guys are, uh, you know, uh, would like to kind of like get familiar with the topic that I'll be talking about today. It's all about secured serverless APIs with Azure Functions and Azure API management. So before we actually talk about it, let me introduce myself first. I'm Brian. And in the first slide, you might have seen this already, but I am a senior consultant. I'm a company here in Australia. I'm also Microsoft MVP for developer technologies for 6 years, and a one time Azure MVP currently. So a fun fact about myself is that I like sports. I watch them. I play them. I think I know more a lot about sports, about basketball, football, rugby, and gridiron than I know tech. But yeah, you can reach me at Mind of AI and most social media and LinkedIn and etc. So yeah, I guess that's it. Let's now go to our agenda. Let's take a look at the our agenda for quickly. First up, we're of course going to talk about the serverless APIs, and then we're going to talk about Azure API management, and we'll figure out how we can manage APIs through APIM. So APIM is just a short version of the API management. So every time I say APIM, it's just API management. And then we'll go jump into some demos that showcase how you can build and deploy serverless APIs. and Azure functions. Then we'll take a look at the design first API approach with AutoRest and APIM, and then how do we secure them? Of course, or rather, add more policies in them. We're gonna also take a look at that with the help of the APIM scope and policies, and then we're just gonna wrap it up. So yeah, without further ado, let's talk about the serverless APIs. So serverless computing has been gaining popularity in the recent years, and uh, as a way of kind of like building and deploying applications quickly at a lower cost. Serverless APIs are a way to build and deploy APIs quickly and you know be able to scale, or actually not even thinking about scaling. Is you don't really have to manage servers and worry about the infrastructure scaling, compared to like the usual servers that you have to always think about, the things that are happening in the background. And the serverless, you don't have to think about it. Instead, you have this cloud provider that is taking care of your scaling of everything else in your server, in the server, which make them highly scalable and cost effective. So how is it cost effective, and how is it everything else that I just said earlier? So by leveraging the power of the Azure functions, we have a powerful service to help us build serverless APIs. With this technology, we can build scalable and highly available APIs, and uh, can handle sudden spikes in traffic without any downtime. One of the key benefits of Azure functions is that they're really lightweight, and they can be used to build small, simple, focused services that only does one thing really well. So what do I mean by that? It can possibly be, maybe you have a service, if you have like a function that you want to use and to or to want to build, and you want to execute that sole function. You can do that with Azure functions. Um, so this makes it really great in building microservices and other types of distributed systems. Another benefit of Azure functions is that, again, cost effective, they're pay per use, meaning that we only pay for the resources that we consume while our functions are running or executing. So this makes them very cost effective, as we don't have to pay for idle resources. So again, only pay for what you use, meaning whenever they are executed, that's the only time that you're gonna have to pay for them. Running, not running, aka running in the background or running idle, it's just whenever someone, or whenever uh, a client or an application has to call the function. That's the only time you're gonna have to pay for it. And the good thing about Azure Functions is that it supports multiple programming languages, including C Sharp, Java, JavaScript, Python, and this makes it easier for you as a developer to uh, build a function that you like, because you don't have to learn C sharp. If you know Java, if you know JavaScript, it's all good. That definitely works. So it depends on what you're most comfortable with. So overall, Azure Functions is a great option for building serverless APIs, as they allow you to focus on writing code instead of worrying about infrastructure and scaling. So how it works? How does Azure Function works? It's basically just reacting to events, and you know and just shoots out an output, basically. So it's reacting to events and triggers that happen within our application or in other parts of cloud. So what do I mean by that? When, let's say, an event occurs, such as maybe um, a blob has been uploaded to a storage, or a message has been sent in through the service bus, or there's a scheduled timer that has gone over like 5 minutes, or maybe every hour, or maybe every day, every single day, every single time in a day. That is an event, and that can trigger the Azure functions. But not only that, you can also trigger it by yourself. Let's say, or through your client, through your application. Let's say you have a website or an application wherein when you click the button you want to execute a function, you can do that as well. That's also a trigger. It's called HTTP trigger. um, and usually and suggestively, these functions again are simple, quick, and stateless. But if you want something that is not simple or maybe not stateless, we have durable functions, which is quite the opposite of what I just said about Azure functions earlier. But obviously, that's another topic. We're not really gonna talk about durable functions. We're just gonna focus on a simple Azure function. Anyway, the output would be whatever or wherever you want it to be and whatever you want it to be. So it can be like another HTTP response. It can be another trigger to a blob storage, or another message on a service bus, or an event grid event. So actually, whatever you like. So that is Azure Functions for you. Now, how does an Azure Functions look like? So in code, so there are two things that will be very important. First one is a function that JSON, which you will see in a lot of in functions in Azure Functions. This is basically the configuration file used to well to set the Azure function. So for this example, this is an Azure function HTTP trigger, and an HTTP trigger is again an input. So it is being basically what's happening here is that this oh, by the way, you might notice here the direction. So there's this direction here. Direction is basically where it should be. So this direction is going in, meaning this is what we are expecting for our Azure functions to receive. Now, the other object in our bindings list is the out, the direction out, which is the output. So basically, what we have here is direction in and the direction out. So the input that we're expecting and the output that we are, um, you know, um, the, the output. So first thing here that you'd notice is the type. So the type is an HTTP trigger, meaning it will be triggered by HTTP requests. It can be a blob trigger, like I mentioned earlier. It can be event grid trigger. It can be a timer trigger. It can be a service bus trigger. But what we have here is an HTTP trigger, meaning it can be triggered by an HTTP call. Another thing that you notice here is the methods. So in HTTP calls, what you have is HTTP methods. So let's say you have a get method, you have a post method, you have a put, you have a delete method. Right now, what we're supporting is only the get because, well, for this Azure functions, we really just want it to be called to get something to execute something, not to post anything or any other methods. And then finally, at the bottom, we have this direction out, which is a type of HTTP, meaning the response is just an HTTP response, so it's not anything else. So that is a function JSON, which again is a configuration file that you would find in Azure Functions. Now, let's say we have an Azure function made in JavaScript. So this is how it's going to look like. So this index.js file is the main entry point for an Azure function made using JavaScript. And right here, it contains just the actual code. It will be executed when the function is triggered. So in this example, we can see that the code is very simple. The function uses context object to generate a response. Right here at the bottom, you can see that we have a response here, and the body has the products list at the top. So you can see we're just building a list of products that has properties, but that's just it. So what I'm showing you here is that this is it. This is how an Azure function looks like. It's very simple. It's very concise. It's straightforward. And again, this is just a simple example, but you can actually put um, much more complex logic within your Azure function. You can add other frameworks or libraries to handle the inputs and the outputs. You can perform data transformation. You can integrate other services or other applications. Maybe you want to use an SDK within it. So whatever you would usually do when developing an application or a service, you can do it in an Azure function. So it's easy as that. It's just basically developing another application, but with just additional configuration. So let me just show you a quick demo of how a function looks like. So this is Visual Studio Code. So Visual Studio Code is something that you can use for developing your web applications, your JavaScript, your what. Actually, it handles a lot of, or it handles a lot, or no, handle is not the right word, but you can use any language that you want, and you can run it on Visual Studio Code. It's a very lightweight IDE. It's like a Visual Studio, but very lightweight, and it caters a lot of programming languages. So what you would notice here is that this is how my Azure Functions project looks like. So I have some of the files here that are related to. Oh, sorry, got a notification. Sorry. Um, sorry. Anyway, so you see here that there are some additional files, but the most important part here are these folders right here. So we have a get products folder, we have the delete product, and the create product folders. Within them, you'd see that there's a function.json. This is the one thing that we were talking about earlier. And then we have the index.js, which is the code. So function.json, you see, the same thing as what we saw earlier. And then the index.js basically returns um, the body or the products as its response body. We also have create products right here. It doesn't do anything, but just to show you that a function consists of only two important files, and that's it. So this one has a method of post, and this delete one has a method of delete. But the code is essentially, again, depends on how you want it to be. So you can remove all of this and put something else. Maybe you want to do some database transactions and stuff. That definitely can work. So now what I can do is run this. So when I run this, I'm basically just going to install some of the NuGet packages, or rather Node packages. But right here, you can see that the functions are now running, and I can just execute them through this link. So should open Postman. Sorry. But yeah, apart from that, I think again, this is just a basic demo. If you want to create a new Azure functions, you have to install the Azure Functions extension here. I already have it installed, this one. And once you install it, you can now uh, have or you can now run commands for from Azure Functions. For example, maybe you want to create a new project or create a new function or deploy it to a function app, which we'll later look at later. So create function, you can create an HTTP trigger with the name of, let's say, get products by ID, get product by ID, and let's say an anonymous authentication, which means it can be accessed by anyone. And I already have it created here. So now, how do we test this? Again, we just need to create, or we just need to run this, and we can go to Postman or whatever, or however you want to call this API, and you can just send it with the oh um I don't know, it might be, might need to be re rebuilt. Here we go. You try that again. There we go. Now we're getting the product. So it's a simple function. It does one thing and one thing only, and it does it that one thing really well. So that is how it works. Um, so again, that is Azure Functions. It is really easy to implement. It is configurable with HTTP methods and routes. It has multiple trade-offs though. It can be difficult to manage, can be difficult to maintain. Um, you have to deal with multiple URLs. You might have like a cart API, you have a products API, a stores API, users API, and transactions API, and you would have different different URLs for each of them. So I'm not talking about just the functions, because in users API you can have get user function, create user function, or delete user function. Uh, but you can have those same functions in maybe in transactions, if create transactions and stuff, and a lot more. It's not just that basic if you're developing a real application, but that's basically it. It would be difficult because you would have to manage multiple URLs at once, and not only that, it sometimes can be slow, or Azure functions can be slow because it takes time uh, to spin up and execute the code for each API request. Maybe because of the computation time, obviously, and maybe added latency. So there's a fix for this, and that is called the Azure API management. So it's not just a fix; it's more of like improving how you manage your APIs. So with Azure API management, we can create a single endpoint for our APIs and then use policies and caching features to optimize our API performance and reduce latency. Azure API management is a powerful tool that allows us to manage and have a centralized, scalable, secure API manager. With the Azure API management, we can definitely set up some policies and rules to control how our APIs are accessed and used. This is how it looks like. You have, let's say, you have the reviews API, and you have a products API. All the clients, web clients, mobile clients, and other services will go through the Azure API management, acting like a reverse proxy, but it's not just that. But basically, how that's how it works. So instead of calling the Azure functions directly, you would call the Azure API management, and you would see, or you would have these Azure functions behind that Azure API management. So yeah, API management acts as a gateway that insulates the caller from the backend details, and allowing it to have a greater flexibility and scalability and security. So again, an API gateway or API management acts like as a gateway, but at the same time, it also helps you with the authentication, with the versioning, with the logging, caching, and then throttling. So we're gonna take a look at some of them later. I think don't have that much time, so I will skip some of the explanations here. So I can still show you the demo. So you get, I guess, 20 minutes more. Um, so serverless API management. So now we have the Azure function, which is serverless, as our serverless API. Now, with the help of Azure API management, we can still proceed, or can still have that fully serverless APIs by using their consumption tier. So what is the consumption tier? It's it's a pricing tier for Azure API management that allows you to have this API management instance to be um, to be serverless. So it has a consumption based micro billing. That means that you only again pay for what you use. So you don't need to reserve, or you don't have a reserve capacity. Instead, you only pay for anything that you're using, or anything that you're using. And the thing with this is that it has curated features, meaning you don't get all of the features like VNet integration. We won't get that. But again, it depends on really what you need. If you're if you were to use an API management with a consumption tier, I think you would mostly focus on its benefits. So it's really up to your needs. If you need a reserved instance, if you need the full features, set of features, you'd go with the standard, premium, developer, or basic. But you know, when you combine the API management with the management consumption tier with the Azure functions, it offers a complete serverless API solution. So yeah, now the use cases are a bit. There's a list of use cases. It can be a gateway for your serverless microservices, like I mentioned, the Azure functions. You can also have a logic app be in front of, or rather, an Azure API management in front of your logic app. And yeah, you can have a lot more. You have a gateway for for your sporadic traffic. It can be used as an entry level API management. You might think it might be complicated, but it isn't. You would see that it's really going to be easy to use. um, and you can also use it for test environments. So yeah, I'm gonna jump into the demo. um, so I actually haven't shown you the where is it? Sorry, give me a sec. I haven't really shown you the function app earlier. So this is the GAB demo JS. This is the same function app that we have here. So you'd notice we have the create product, delete product, and get product right here. Yep. And I've already deployed it, and this is how it looks like. So you can, create, delete, and get, and you know instead of using it locally now, what I can do is just copy this URL, and instead of calling it uh, using the local host, can use this Azure functions base URL, and call the get products function, and I'm still getting the same thing. So now we have that Azure functions running in the Azure function in my Azure function resource in the up in the cloud. So now what I can do is create an API management. So API management can be created by looking up API management service in your Azure portal. And you see I have a list of Azure API management already, which we will use later because it takes a while to create one. So when you create one, you press this create button, and then you pick a region. You give a resource name, let's say GAB Demo APIM, and organization name is Global Azure. And then you can give it any administrator email. So the pricing tier that I'm talking about is right here. So you can pick consumption, or you can pick anything else. So I'm gonna stick with consumption. I'm gonna going to the next one. You can set up application insights for logging purposes, for debug purposes. It makes it easier for you to debug the API management with the help of app insights. And everything else you can't scale if you have consumption tiers, also developer, and yep, and the other stuff. So I'm not going to create this because it will take a while. Instead, I already have one right here. So this is Global Azure MNL APIM. So what do I see here? So I see here, if you scroll down, APIs. So this is where I can set up my APIs to be managed by the API management. So we have products here. Products, just to give you an info about this, it's mainly a logical grouping uh, in a way that you like to group your APIs. So let's say you have users API, you have transactions API, you have shopping carts API. If those are used for a specific product, let's say you have a an e-commerce product, you can create that e-commerce product and group your APIs into that. So just so you know, this is a scope. This is called the product scope, and we'll see more of it later when we create the policies. But just so you know, we have the uh, product scope. That is a logical grouping basically, and we have the APIs where we can add the APIs. So how do we add APIs here? So what do I mean whenever I say create APIs? So you can create an API or kind of like a reverse proxy for your existing services. Let's say you have a web API running in an app service, or an API running using the function apps like this one that we have. You can add them into your API management, so you can have them behind your API management. Now, instead of calling those APIs directly, those function apps, those app service APIs directly, you have to go through the API management service. So let's do this by, well, first, let's see how you can do it right here. So you can create a new one, a blank one, if you want. You can use GraphQL or a WebSocket, or maybe you can create one from a definition, an Open API or a Swagger API definition or specification. Or maybe you can create one from an Azure resource, which we have right now. We have an Azure function. So we can select the Azure function. You also have container apps, by the way, which I've used before on the Azure API management service, which is worked really well. But this time we're going to be using function app. So let's select that. So it's asking us for a couple of things: the function app that we want to create, the name, the display name, and the name and the suffix for the API URL. It can be blank because it can be just the root, but we're not going to do that. Instead, we're going to give it something. So what we're going to do now is browse to look for the Azure functions that I have, and you can see this is the list, and this is what we're looking for: the GAB demo.js. This is the one, right? And when we look at here, we have these functions: create, delete, and get. So when we select this, it will list down all of my functions within my function app. Why? It's because I can remove some of them and abstract them from my Azure API management. So if I only want to expose the create and the get, and not allow the consumers to use the delete and this one right here, this is a mistake, should have removed this, but let's say this one and this one, and we only want to expose the create and get, we can just select those two. So I can select that and now give it a name. So this is a um, product API, because we have a create and get product, and we're gonna add the product as its suffix. So what we can do now is we can go to this URL, use this URL to call our functions. So you can now create this. Takes a couple seconds, and there we go. So now we have these operations: create product operation and the get product operation. So we can, of course, you can see here that there's a pencil icon here, meaning we can still update this. Do we want to call it the create product, do we want to have create product endpoint, or do we want it to be just called or just call the root? So you can do that as well. So you can just save this, and now by calling this URL right here, or actually you can actually test it. So one thing that you can do here is you can actually test. So there's a test button here. What you can do is you can just send the request, and that's gonna basically create a test request. And this is a test URL or the request URL. So now if we send this, oh, it's 404. Why is it 404? Mm, maybe let's go with the get first. So let's see if it works right now. Yep, it works. So maybe there's something wrong with my post API, but again, basically what you can do is to do to test your APIs through this test tab right here. If I go to select settings again, let's check what I missed there. Nah, I didn't miss anything. But anyway, yep. So now I'm assuming that what I can do is if it works right like this, I can just copy this link or this URL and paste it here, see if it works. But it doesn't. It says 401. 401 is usually when you're not you need to your access denied. Basically, you need to include an authentication, or you need to be authenticated before you can access this. And why? Why does it not work? So it says here that access denied due to missing subscription key. Make sure to include the subscription key. So what is that subscription key? So subscription keys are given to to consumers basically. Now that you have this API management service on top of your functions, you can now set up subscription keys that you can give away to your consumers or maybe your clients or your developers. So they're the only ones who's going to be able we're going to be able to access your APIs. So it can be removed if you want to, or just if you just want it, just to make sure that okay, only these people, only the my developers can use this API because I've given them subscription keys. So you can take a look at the settings to see if it's enabled. So right here, subscription is required. So I can remove this and I can save this. And now I'm able to do API calls, but I want to put it back to enable it. And I can what I should do is I can pass in this header. This is the header name, by the way. You can change it if you want. But what I can do is go to the headers and add this OCP blah 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 subscription key. And now where's the subscription key? You notice here that we have a subscriptions tab, and it gives or we can create the subscriptions if we want to. So in the subscriptions, we can provide the name, we can provide a display name, and the scope. So what are scoped into what are scoped for this subscription? Because what you can do is you can only give access to a specific API. Maybe you don't want to give them the access to the user's API. You just want to give your developers access to products API. You can do that. You can just select APIs and yep, you can select the APIs. There it is. So you can just say, okay, I want you to have like products only. Same thing here. I can only access the API products. So let's create this now. And now what I can do is show the keys, and I can copy the key and then paste it here. Let's see if it will work without the key. So it doesn't. Now we paste the key. There it is. It's working again. So that is one thing that we can do. It has a default subscription key that can be used for everything. So it's a built-in all access subscription key. But yeah, that is one of the built-in securities that you have here in API management service. You can add more if you want, which we'll talk about later. But now, what I want to show you is that I can add more. So let's say I want to add an app service. So let's say I have an app service called this one, the GABPH web API. So this one is an API. Trying to remember GB. This one right here. So this is just weather forecast. So if I try this out, it's just returning the weather forecast. So that's basically it. So one thing that you can do here now is to add this from app service. But you know what? What I notice here is that it's not adding the the functions or the APIs that you have. It's just adding like weird API URLs, which is not what you expect. So let's say if we add this, oh, not create an API. Sorry, I must have double clicked it. You see here that this is not the APIs that I have. So I don't have these APIs. These are just root API or root URLs. Or basically base URLs, and they just added all these operations, and this does not really exist. This is the only API that I have. So how do I get this instead of getting all these? So let me remove this for now. Instead, what I want to do is to create a blank API and call it weather forecast. And let's have a uh, of weather forecast. There we go. So now what I can do is click this three dots and do an import, and let's import an open API. So now we can pass in the open API specification, which is this one, but it's not. It is expecting a JSON. So what we can do is go to .json instead. Oh, sorry. Um, Trying to remember what that was. Um, was it again? It's not dot index.json, swagger.json, I think. No, no, no. Okay. So I'm trying to remember what that was. Swagger. Oh, here we go. Yeah, we have that link right here at the top. So you can click that link, and you'll be navigated to the Swagger JSON. Um, then we just need to pass it here, then import. Here we go. So now you can see here that I got the actual operation, which is the get weather forecast. So now what I can do is copy this again and paste it here. Oh, there we go. It doesn't work. Why? Because remember, the subscription key is only for the products API. So I need to go back to the subscriptions. Instead of using this products only, what I can do is I can use this built-in one, so I can have all access. So if I use this, oh, copy the right one. It did. Anyway, let's just maybe update this one to allow all APIs and save it. Now let's try again. What is wrong? That's weird. Oh, I think I know what's wrong. So I think we should go to our APIs again and go to the web API demo. settings. Okay. So we don't have the web service URL. So what does that mean? So I we need to have this GAB right here. We need to provide the service URL, which means that okay, this is my base URL. So we've only given the specifications, the Swagger specifications, but it doesn't know which API, which website should it go to. Okay, let's try it again now. Hopefully it works. There it goes. It works now. So just need to provide that because the only thing that we provided earlier was a Swagger specification. We have yet to provide the actual URL that it needs to that should be specified. So that's the only thing there that needs to be added. So want to go now to the design first API approach. And what I mean by that is, let's say I am a developer, or I am not a developer. Let's say I'm a product owner. I want I want APIs. I want to create an API, but I only know the details in my head, but I don't know the technical terms for it. But or if technical, how do I do it technically? I'm not sure. So let's say my persona at the moment. So what I can do is create another one. Let's say I want to create user um, user API. Let's say that okay, whenever I call this user AP URL, this is basically my way to create or to call the user's API. I want to have like a user suffix. Let's create this now, and we can add operations. We can add operations without the actual backend. We just need to add the operations. Let's say I want to create a get user operation. Okay, it's a get user. Now, what do I get whenever I use the get user operation? Let's say response. So let's add a response. So whenever we do get, a successful get would return 200 response. And how do I want to for it to um, be represented? I want to get a JSON response. Okay, and now, I want to define what are the properties that should be included in my user model. So I can say, okay, this is a user definition. What I want is to have an ID for my user. I want the name for my user. Oh, sorry. And I want an email for my user. Sorry. Brian at gmail.com. This is not mine, but So as you may notice, while I was creating the sample JSON, it also created this payload that it's expecting. So it's expecting an ID, name, an email with the corresponding data type. So when I create this now, I can save this. Oh, sorry. Yep. So how do I call it? So let's say want to say get or maybe just blank because we already have the user suffix. So just want to pass in a blank URL and just press save. So meaning that whenever I go to the URL, um, to the yeah to the slash user endpoint, I would be able to instantly get the users or get the user. Now we can add another one. Let's say create user. Instead of a get, let's use a post. So we can now add a request body right here and do the same thing. We are expecting a JSON, not this kind, this one. So apart from that, we can now use the definition, the user definition, and we can create, auto-generate a sample data for it. So same thing, it's going to be like that. So now we have the create user and the get user. We don't have the code yet. We don't have anything. So what I can do now to generate code for this is that I can right click, or I can click this three triple dots here and export this as a JSON. So now I got that as a JSON. So we have like an open API specification now. It doesn't have implementation. It just has the specification with, the get and the what was it again? The create. So now how do I implement it? Oh, let's stop this. How do here we go. I'm just gonna close it. Let me open Visual Studio Code again and close this folder. So now what I can do is control to look for the create function or the create project, the Azure function. I can create a new folder, GAB demo 123. Okay. And then select this. I can now create a C sharp function using the .NET 6, and I can create an HTTP trigger functions using an open API specification, which I've done earlier. So it's asking me for a namespace. I can just use that, and I can go to downloads. Where is it? I think it's this one. Users open API JSON, and then I can open it in the current window. So what it's doing right now is it's generating a new project for my C sharp Azure functions code with the get and the post, or and the get and the create user. So yep, just this. So now we have the model, the user's model earlier that we've created. We have the ID, the name, and the email. And then we have the user's API, which is basically the code that it was able to generate, which does the get users and does the create user. So we can just change the name if we want to. Um, but we also have here the implementation. But right now we don't have any implementations, and we're not going to implement anything now because we don't have that much time. But basically, we have generated a code. You can just add the implementation here for your developers. Let's say the database transactions, database calls and stuff. But you were able to scaffold something from an open API specifications that you got from the Azure API management, which again has nothing at the moment. We just added where is it? Just added the create product and get products, and that's it. That's just something in my head as a product owner. I know what the JSON looks like, and I created what I expect to get, or to have for my user model. um, so yeah, that is how the design first API approach works. So I know we don't have that much time. We're gonna go ahead and just talk about the policies. So policies is basically how you can add um, some additional features for your API management. So in your API management, you can configure policies. Essentially, it is a state of or set of statements that can be modified, or that can modify the behavior of your APIs. Let's say you have an older API and you've imported it into API management. Let's say that returns an XML. What you can do is, on the response, you can convert that XML into JSON without changing anything in your API code. You just need to add something on top of that through the API management. And that's what I'm going to show you later. So, uh, since you can update the original code base, you basically can do transformations. You can filter out sensitive data if you want to. You can add the caching if you want to. So it wouldn't have to go through your API, your function apps, your app services every single time. So there's a lot of policies to choose from, but we're gonna take a look at some of them later. So Um, this is just another example of what I was talking about earlier. We have scopes. Another one scope that we talked about earlier is the product scope, meaning you can have like a logical grouping for your APIs, and you can have multiple APIs to have the policy through or yeah through the group uh group APIs for products or of through products. Sorry, um, so you can set policies for all of it through global. You can set policies for products or a set of APIs that are grouped to the products, or you can set policies within all or for all of the APIs, or you can set policies specifically for a specific operation. Let's say a get product operation or the update product operation. You can do that. So let's. Oh shoot, sorry. But I'm gonna do a quick demo now. Yep, demo. So let's have a look here. Um, so how can we add um, what these things that I'm talking about? So let's say I have this. Go to the products. So what I can do is I can select all operations, or I can just select a single product if I want to. What I can do is I can add policies by clicking this policies editor, and with this I'm able to. It's a bit clogged. Yeah, it's a bit clogged. Let me just zoom out if I can. There we go. So you may notice here that we have caching policies. We have access restriction policies. We have different kinds of policies. But what I want to do now is, remember, you have to select or you have to click the part where you want to add the policies, because these are clickable, and when you click them it will add something, or it will add a chunk of code, or a chunk of configuration. Let's say I want to limit the call rate per subscription. So this is your rate limiter, and what it does, it can give a number of calls that you want to be done within uh, an amount of time. Meaning, let's say you can only only do 5 API calls per 10 seconds. So if you do 6 API calls within 10 seconds, you're not going to be able to do that. You will be limited to do the API calls. So these right here can be removed, because these are for to specify which APIs to implement this rate limiter for, but we want to implement it to everything. So you can save this and go to get products. And what I can do here is test this. Let's say send it. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So right now I'm getting limited because I can only do 5 API calls. Was it five? But yeah, I can only do 5 API calls in 10 seconds. Now I think 10 seconds is gone. I can call it again, and when I try another and another and another, and there we go. I'm getting another limit. So 5 API calls every 10 seconds. And of course, I can update that whenever I want to. So um, going back to design, we can add a few more. Actually, have a few more, but we don't really have that much time. So we can actually add course as well. You have here, let me copy it. Something like this. So with the course, you can say that you only allow these URLs to call your APIs, only allowed methods and headers. So you can add CRS whenever you want. Let me remove that for now. You can also add uh, this choose policy. So what it does is let me actually open up the other one, which is which I've already added all of it on the APIs. I think it's in the products. No, no, it's on the users. Yeah, right here. Sorry, it's the weather forecast API. I've added here the CRS course, and we have this choose. So it's basically a condition policy, which on this example we're checking if the user or the client is using a mobile application or a mobile phone. If it's using a mobile phone, it will add a query parameter called mobile and set it to true. So an example of that would be like if I do this get weather forecast. Um, Takes a while. Yeah, it's taken a while, but what it does is it adds this. You wouldn't see it here, but if I do the trace, it doesn't. Yeah, it doesn't. Okay, sorry, this one. So you can see here on the trace, you see how the policies are, are executing. So you can actually see that okay, we're checking or we're running these and that. So the CRS, so we're running that. We're setting the backend service, so that's not a problem. This is the rate limiter. Okay, there's a counter for this. So and then this is the choose. So since I'm not using a mobile, the value is set to false. So if I scroll down, I think you see here is my full URL that was given, or that is going to be a response. It's added this mobile equals false query parameter because of that uh, policy. And there's a few more. We actually have this JSON to XML, meaning we can get the response as a JSON or as an XML, even though even though we have a JSON response in our backend, we can convert it into an XML. So you can see this one right here, we're converting it automatically to XML because of that JSON to XML. Um, Outbound policy. So JSON to XML. Last one last thing is that we can create revisions. So let's say we have a current one that we've developed a couple days ago, and currently, or for today, we have a new revision. You can add a new revision if you want, and you can set that as your current, meaning every client that is using your current API will now use that will now be using that new API. Obviously, that includes like maybe changing the base URL or adding more APIs for your function apps and your for your app services. And you can still access old revisions or new revisions by adding like this revision query parameter. Yeah, yeah, I guess that's it. Story. I have a lot of things to talk to you about, but obviously that's the only things that I can talk about with my time. And obviously I've done a lot more or I've extended my time, but just to give you a bit of resources, you can take a look at these links if you want to learn more about Azure Functions, Azure API Management, and if you want to do a quick workshop where you do or where you make a serverless APIs using Azure Functions and API Management. And yeah, I guess that's it. Thank you so much for listening. I hope this gave you an idea about what you can do with Azure Functions and API Management. If you have any questions, just again send me a message on my I didn't put my email here, but it's Brian Anthony Garcia at live.com, or you can just send me a message to my socials at Mind of AI. Yeah, thank you so much for listening. I appreciate you guys, and yeah, have a great day.
Thank you so much, Brian. That's a lot of technical information. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know why you said that you know more about sports than tech.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
if
I
there's
mean,
more in sports in your head.
yeah, I just do. I mean, that's. I think I'm really passionate about sports, but it's much easier to remember the names, the things that are the events, the things that are happening in sports, than to remember like the, block of codes, how you implement stuff. So yeah, that's kind of like something that I think I just am. So yep.
It wasn't obvious at all during your entire 1 hour because that's a lot of info, and yeah, I'm definitely going to rewatch the recording, and
Mhm.
you can find that on our YouTube channel and of course our Facebook. And then if you do have other questions for Brian, I'm sure you can just reach out to the contact info that he gave, and also of course try to be a bit more active in our social media channels. You can post questions on our Facebook as well. Anything regarding Azure Function, serverless, application security, API management. These are really great topics. Very very useful on your everyday work if you're a developer or a cloud developer. As Brian is, or in architecture. I do have just one questions before we move to our next session. So you did mention about container apps,
Uh huh.
Azure container apps,
Yep.
and then now you have Azure functions, and they're all used for building API and also microservices. When would you recommend using one over the other?
Oh, I guess it depends on really what you need as because we actually had this dilemma as well, because Azure Function is obviously a serverless, and we want or one of our clients wanted to have a proper serverless microservice solution. But we thought that maybe Azure, and we went through all of the things that we can give them or we can use as as a solution, but we end up using Azure Container Apps. And one of the main reasons why we use that is because it just gives you a lot of I don't know. The Azure container apps at the moment has a lots of features that just really helps you to build microservices. It focuses more on the microservices side of things with the help of the Dapper what you call this with the help of Dapper, basically DAPR, which makes that distributed applications implementations a lot easier. And we're not getting that with Azure Functions. But I'm not saying that Azure Functions isn't a great solution for building microservice applications or solutions. It's just that with container apps, it gives you a lot more. It helps you out in building a proper microservice solution, unlike with the Azure Functions. But I think container apps is still not that mature compared to Azure Functions. Looking back, I feel like we could have just used Azure Functions anyways. But there's a lot more reasons why I think at the top of my head, that's what I can think of. But yeah, that's those two things, Azure Functions and container apps, are basically the ones that are think that which one really would you like to use, in contrast to app service, because app service, you can use that for web applications and a whole hosting of web applications, which, by the way, you can do that in Azure container apps as well. So that's also one thing. Azure Functions, you'd have an Azure or functions that are running up in the cloud, and you can use it for execution. But the Azure container apps, you can even host a web application or an actual front end running, in the cloud. So yep, that is also one thing.
All right. Yeah, thank you so much because I guess that's like the probably one of the most common decision points when you're building microservices or
Mhm.
service-based applications, right? Whether to go serverless or to go container-based and
Yep.
different level of management. So Yeah, so
Yeah.
that's a good comparison. But I really, really like how you showed how to, of course, configure your APIs using API management, because there it doesn't really care whether you're using containers behind the scene as your backend pools or Azure
Yeah.
functions. And you can switch around, right? Whether like if
Yeah. Yeah.
some are functions and some are containers, then in the API management, you will just kind of configure them together.
Yeah. You know, it offers a lot of those what you call this yeah, but basically it gives you those API gateway functionalities or features that you'd like to have for your APIs, and so it also supports those services. So it's a really great option for to have as an API gateway pattern if you want to set up an API gateway pattern. Plus, there's a lot more things that you definitely can learn in the policies side of things of the API management. So I would suggest really just to have a look, do your research on the API management because it does a lot of great things.
Yeah, and it's definitely needed, because when you start building APIs, like in one of the diagrams that you showed, you start building a couple of APIs, maybe 1 to 3 endpoints, and suddenly if you build the entire domain, you have like 10, 50
Yeah,
different APIs. You certainly need the gateway there, the API gateway.
yeah. And it's not so difficult because again, with the help of your Open API specifications, you can import all of your endpoints. I remember we had an Open API specification, a Swagger specification, which has like hundreds of endpoints, and we just uploaded the JSON file, and it added every single one of them. So, if you have that, will not be very difficult. It would not be difficult at all. So yeah.
All right, that's great.
Yep.
Thank you again. Thank you, Brian. I feel like sessions like this should be a whole day workshop. So
Oh
maybe
yeah,
next
yeah.
time it's going to
Oh,
be a
yeah. I
workshop.
think whenever I talk, it feels like it's gonna be a whole workshop. because, there's really information overload. So yeah, definitely I hope that maybe in the next one I can share more about this, but yeah, at the moment those are, I think for now, those are the things that I can talk about. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you again for your time, and I wish you a nice evening there. It's
Yep.
in Denmark. Thursday is what we call Little Friday, so I'm
Oh.
going to, yeah,
Oh
yeah,
yeah,
it's Little
yeah.
Friday. Do you have
I
something
feel
like
like,
that in
yeah, it
Australia?
is. Yeah, right now, every Thursday as well, here in Australia. It's weird. This kind of like culture shock for me. I didn't know why they have it on Thursday, but apparently that's how they do it. Yeah,
Yeah. So I wish you a happy Little Friday and enjoy your
yeah.
evening and enjoy the rest of the week. Thank you, Brian.
All right.
We're gonna have a small break. I'm going to look for for our next speaker, Michael. I
Oh,
don't.
okay.
I mean, I can see his camera, but I don't know if he's there. So I'm just gonna take a short break for everyone. Stay tuned, and yeah, we'll be back. For the meantime, please do. Um, Send us your feedback if you like this event, and if you like the content, or if there's anything that you think that we can improve on, please send us your feedback. It's very important for us so that we can also plan other events in the future that is more catered for what you need. And right now I'm actually really torn because I'm hosting this live stream here in one screen, and then I have my phone next to me where I am like um, in the team's meeting for the in-person event at Microsoft Philippines for one of my colleagues, Leslie Hinales. She is now currently talking about, her Azure journey, her certifications. She has, I think, she managed to finish like more than 10 certifications within 1 year. She's also a certified AWS Architect Associate, as well as a Azure Architect. So she's sharing her journey there. And the good thing is, I know we said at Meetup that the in-person event at Microsoft is not going to be recorded, but Microsoft is so kind enough to host this via Teams, so they are also recording it. So later on, within the next couple of days, of course, we're going to be uploading the recording for the in-person sessions at our YouTube and share that also in our Facebook channel, so you don't have to miss it. But I know everyone is also very excited to hear our next talk, uh, which is very, very hot topic at the moment. I am also very excited to listen to this talk and really focus. And I'm so happy that it's one of my good friends in the community who's going to do this talk for us. And he a is a real expert, I would say, in the data world, in AI world, in machine learning world. This is his real passion. He's been working um, with this for, well, I don't know about open AI, we will hear from him, but anything about artificial intelligence and machine learning, Michael has been, working with this for so many years. So I'm going to invite him on stage now. I think he's ready. Michael.
Yeah, hello. Hi everyone. Hi Marilag.
Hello. Hi, Michael. Penny.
Can, can,
MJP.
can you hear me okay, by the way?
Yes, you
Okay,
sound good. Yes.
nice.
So
Yeah, I thought the format was supposed to be like virtual in person. So it turns out it's in parallel.
yeah, yeah, we planned it originally to be like that, but that would be a bit more tricky because also of the time constraints. We only have 4 hours, so we have to do it in parallel. We have to have a choice, and I hate to give this choice to the audience, but we also think it would be a little awkward when you're sitting uh, at Microsoft and then you're just watching a live feed.
Yeah,
So I think it would be nicer that they everything there is in person, and then like I said, we're lucky enough to have Microsoft recorded on Teams, and then a lot of people are joining on the Teams channel as well. So we have a very, very good turnout, and there are a lot of students at Microsoft right now.
yeah,
I saw one of our friends, Pio. I think he's enjoying being with the young people out there because when you've been in the community for so long, right? Seeing new
yeah.
faces is
I was
always
one of those kids like 12, 13 years ago. So I know. So the excitement
yeah.
of the in-person presence is in there, right? And that's usually the side talks and the like conversations that happen on the side. Those are really the things that you would remember, and that's what's gonna drive you to learn more about the topic usually, right? Like back in the days, I'm very new to C Sharp and .NET, and like MVPs and like presenters from Microsoft was the one who's really kind of like driving my interest, right? Like, oh wow, you can do this. Oh wow, you can kind of like it propels your interest. And I think in my perspective, a pursued interest, that's what you call passion, right? When you try to pursue things over and over, that's when you can say that, hey, you're passionate onto something. Yeah. And I think that's
Yeah.
what community is for, right? Like to find people who pursue interests so that they can find passion, and that passion ignites into something else, maybe work or business or anything really.
Yeah, and it's a career kickstarter, and I would say a game changer for all of us here who's been in the community for a couple of years now. You have no idea how much the community has also propelled our not just our professional careers, but also our own personal development with speaking and yeah, with networking, with just building relationships with people. It's so super helpful. That's why I'm so happy that there are young people out there
Yeah,
attending in person. I know COVID is again starting
correct.
up in Manila. Yeah, but they are there. There are some couple of no shows, understandably, but just 1, 2, 3 people who would turn out to be like us in the future, who becomes very active.
And I think
So worth it.
the other thing as well, Marilag, is that with this type of communities, I think this is one of the key solution to that chicken and egg situation of no experience but wants a job, and wants a job but no experience, kind of like dilemma, kind of stuff. Like because joining a community kind of like narrows your focus into something, and again your pursued interest, right? So that on its own is experience, right? That on its own, attending and participating, that is experience, right? And that gives you kind of like focus that, hey, I really want to pursue .NET, even if I don't have professional experience yet. I want to pursue Azure, or I want to pursue OpenAI, but I don't have the professional experience yet, but like you get that 20-80% rule, right? That you get that first 20%, then now it's about executing the 80% once you're in there. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And I also have a company in the Philippines. So when we hire, we do look at not just your experience, but how active are you in the community, because that shows interest in the technology that you work with. So even if you have less experience, I can see that you have attended all these events, and that matters, because sometimes it's even more important what you get in the community than what you get sitting down in school and just going
Yeah.
through the curriculum. So you have to have a balance. So yeah, let's keep the community going. Let's keep it active. Now we're past that really difficult stage of pandemic and screen burnout, so we can do a hybrid. I'm not in the Philippines, but I'm hosting it remotely, and I have my co-organizers there doing a great job. Joanna, she's amazing. So yeah, let's keep it going. And now let's talk about, oh my gosh, open
Oh
AI.
wow, yeah, yeah. It's very, very exciting topic. All right. Yeah, like when I first submitted this talk, right? Like honestly, that first draft that I sent, so many things have changed already since then, just in a matter of weeks. And even the content that I'll be showing today, it's probably 2 weeks obsolete already, or like 2 weeks kind of like out of date. Because again, it's such an exciting and emerging kind of like landscape. Now it's kind of like when the App Store, the Xamarin and the whole kind of like ecosystem boomed, right? Like the Angular direct app kind of like thing. Now everyone's talking about this, and like everyone's building something on top of this, and it's kind of like again when you're kind of like in the forefront of technology, or even before that, right? You're kind of like seeing, hey, and you're asking yourself, where is this going? And like at that point in time, at this kind of like present time, you actually don't know who's gonna be the winner, right? Like I remember back in 2016, everyone's talking about Docker, container services, but who's gonna win? Kubernetes, PCOS, Docker Swarm, everyone was just talking about different stuff. And fast forward to 2021, 22, 23, we know that Kubernetes is the thing, right? So what I'm saying is that with OpenAI, with LLMs and all of this, no clear pattern, no clear winner yet, right? So it's kind of like all the exciting stuff because everyone's literally building it on the day. Cool.
Yes, and let's see who's going to win.
Yeah. All right. Let me share my screen. Okay, screen number 2, not 3. Yep. Okay. Sharing my content. Cool. All right. So, by the way, the good thing about doing this today is that I'm also presenting this on Saturday on Sydney, Global Azure Bootcamp Sydney. So, yeah, please ask as many questions as you can. And again, very interesting topic. So, a little about me. I'm a Microsoft MP for Azure. Currently an independent consultant, still is at the moment. Um, Interest is more aligned, with the Microsoft developer tools, .NET, Azure, and anything kind of like emerging tech within this ecosystem. And one thing I'm really passionate about in the past few years is about neurodiversity. Because if personally, I want to share that my son was diagnosed with autism, and that kind of like became a lifelong kind of like journey for me and my family to kind of like advocate about this type of things. Um, so this will be a very jam-packed session for us, but like I think the short version, if I can say what this would be, is that I'm gonna talk about what a bunch of Azure services are related to AI, and like what are the patterns out there, and like what can you actually do, like what kind of like emerging patterns, right? Like I have like 6 kind of like patterns here to show that like it's all work in progress. Like there's no clear answer yet on how do you actually do this thing, but I guess yeah, in few years time, in few months time, we'll actually know. And I'll also do some demos at the end. I pre-recorded them because there's a bunch of environment setup that needs to be done. So I just created a recorded video so that it's all kind of like pre-configured. So in terms of Azure technologies, right? One thing I would say is that Azure, even before ChatGPT came to be, it's already kind of like big, with AI, right? Like they've been um, Microsoft and Azure, they've been kind of like loud or vocal already about AI and like how AI transform businesses, how AI transform lives. It's just like different type of flavors, right? So back then, AI within Microsoft are more focused. It's either in cognitive services, like hey, I'm a developer, I need an API to do some AI stuff. I'd go to cognitive services, right? Or what if, hey, I have data scientists, I have a proper data pipeline, proper data engineering pipeline. Then I do have Azure machine learning, right? And then obviously there's also an emergence of other non-Microsoft proprietary capabilities such as Databricks, right? And not just that, obviously, in other cloud providers and other platforms, you have Snowflake, you have BigQuery, and like there's just abundance of this different type of tools, like whether it's big data, it's reporting, it's machine learning, like what specific part of machine learning, all those kind of like so many options now. Like in 2023 we have so many kind of like options out there. And then there was also a demand for like, hey, you have so much data within your kind of like enterprise setting. Now you have a capability to do a cognitive search, meaning like, hey, I want to search within my, the whole lot of my enterprise data. And there you go. Then lastly is the Azure bot service, which is kind of like, this came in even before chat gpt came into be. It's kind of like an easy way framework for developers to create chatbots, right? Like if you do remember back in the days about a bunch of like the chatbots, like the tiles and all those kind of like flows and stuff like that. They're kind of like the early days of what chat gpt is, right? And now we're in a different kind of like realm. But to put it simply, right, there the way Microsoft and Azure is offering this at the moment is that, um, hey, are you a developer? Then maybe you can be more on like API driven, right? Are you more on custom scenarios? Then you can extend cognitive services like such as language, vision, decision and speech. Or are you like, like again, what I told earlier, right? Like, hey, they have a proper data science capability. Then you can use Azure machine learning and like, use a proper kind of like pipeline around that. The proper, you know, um, model training, proper concept of inferencing, and stuff like that. But even then, right? Even then, with this type of kind of like setting, right? Even with Azure ML, the idea of machine learning back in 2021 or 22, right, was that the data scientist comes up with a model and expose it through an API, right? And then the developers comes up with like, hey, someone's doing this kind of like interaction, pass it to the model as an API, and then you get a proper, a possible kind of like response out of that. But then things have changed with the introduction of Open API, or like the way they've kind of like serviced this all together. Because now instead of just like the concept of like, hey, create a model out of your data set, and then you know um, then expose that through an API of some sort, right? And then that becomes your inference capability. This time around, it's kind of like different in a way that, what if you're not just training with your kind of like own data, right? With your own kind of like model. What if you're actually training using, a large language model, or like, like meaning like you're training, you have a model that is trained with, a very big data set, which is literally the internet, right? From the beginning of time until like a specific snapshot. And that's when GPT came to be, right? So GPT is a large language model that's basically a snapshot of the internet, until like a specific point in time, which in this case is August and September 2021, right? So then, besides just having that large language model, what's even better was that OpenAI came up with this concept of like, hey, what if you can actually interact with that model, not just retrieve data, right? So that's when ChatGPT came to be, wherein like, hey, you have now a concept of a flow, wherein like, hey, I asked this first, I asked ChatGPT this, then it answers that, and then it tries to, it's kind of like self-tuning, or like a chain of different Q&As, right? That's kind of like unpredictable, well, in some regards, right? And then there's like a very configurable type of setting on how do you want the response to be. Um, so not just ChatGPT, right? OpenAI also introduced DAL-E, which is a service to, instead of text, it generates image, right? Now another popular image generator is Midjourney, which is actually very advanced at this stage. But the concept is still the same, wherein you're creating a prompt, and that prompt kind of like generates content for you, right? So that's literally what ChatGPT and DALL-E is, right? So the way Microsoft leveraged um, OpenAI service is that, hey, what if instead of just OpenAI creating a service, right? That you know um, be consumed by the internet or by the public. What if you have an option to actually bring this to a more kind of like enterprise setting, right? Or like more on like um, a specific kind of like scenario kind of stuff, which is where Microsoft and Azure is really kind of like powerful, right? Like they focus on the enterprise, the industries and whatnots, right? So that was kind of like I would say the major driver around this, right? And so one of the key kind of like pattern that emerged out of that is that, hey, what if you come up with this concept of a GPT smart search architecture, wherein like the idea about this one is that you actually have your content, right? Then you perform a search within your kind of like internal database, and the whole kind of like data sources, like your SharePoint, your Cosmos DB, your SQL servers, your data warehouses and stuff like that. And then from there, you kind of like index and structure, and from there you kind of like create a query, and then that query creates a response, right? So this on its own is kind of like GPT in a way that it's smart search. It's more like analyzing the content that you're actually kind of like for example, you try to retrieve a document, and then you use GPT to actually analyze that document or summarize that document and serve it to the user, right? So this is not like talking to chat GPT, wherein the chat GPT is the one that's kind of like serving information to the user. This is more around like, hey, whatever content was served by cognitive search, actually interact with GPT, and then you do some sanitation around that, and then push it back to the user as a response. Okay. So again, this is one pattern to look at on how this could be. The other pattern that you can actually look at is the Azure Cognitive Search architecture, wherein like wherein instead of actually talking to GPT at all, right? Like why not literally just aggregate the whole thing within your ecosystem, within your all data, and then just kind of like push it back, right? Like because one limitation of GPT of OpenAI is that again, it's only limited until the September 2021 data set, right? So that means that hey, if it's an information that is about my company, then I don't need GPT at all, right? So you just kind of like use cognitive search per se, and then push it to the user. The other approach that you can actually look at is this concept of prompt engineering and fine tuning. So this is where it gets a bit very tricky, and I'm not sure if this is actually the right approach, but some people think it is. But all right, the way I kind of like the easiest way to explain this, right, is that instead of um, you have two ways of kind of like interacting with GPT models, right? So you either use prompt engineering or you use fine tuning. Okay, so I'll go first with prompt engineering. So assume you have GPT until September 2021, right? Now you use prompt engineering in a way that you're kind of like creating some filters and you're creating some kind of like capabilities within GPT. Like you're actually telling GPT, hey, this is the kind of like way you should talk, right? Or this is how you're kind of like how you should actually kind of like interact. So one example is that, for example, if you want to create a bot that will act as a customer service representative of Xbox, right? Then one good thing that you could kind of like incorporate as part of the prompt engineering is that, hey, when someone asks about Nintendo, just mention that, hey, you don't, like you don't kind of like do that, right? Or like, hey, you're only allowed to answer about Xbox, right? So it's kind so the way it works really is that you using prompt engineering, you're kind of like creating your own kind of like parameters on how GPT or chat GPT will respond for you. So it's kind of like saying, hey, you have GPT instance that is supposed to talk about animals. Then, or like, it's a zoo kind of like capability bot. Then you can also, use prompt engineering to kind of like say that, hey, you're a zoologist, right? Then this is the type of answers that you should be answering, right? So that's literally what prompt engineering is like. A prompt engineer kind of like tames. Yeah, that's probably the best way to put it, right? It tried to tames GPT and Chat GPT in order to spit out the desired response. You know, fine tuning, on the other hand, is about, hey, um, what if GPT itself? Let's extend that, right? Like the actual big, large language model of GPT. What if let's put our data in there, right? Then maybe if we put our data in this big model, maybe it becomes smarter in a way it talks about our company. So that may work, but I've tried it. It's not there yet, or because again, there are many problems with that approach. The problem number one is that, yeah, again, GPT is just until September 2021. Now you try to put in your data in there. Problem number one is that you're also kind of like creating a point in time reference of your data, right? Like, hey, you trained, this GPT LLM with your data 2 weeks ago of your data. So that means it's built on top of your data 2 weeks ago, right? But then at the same time, even if it was trained 2 weeks ago, besides the fact that you might have new data, which most likely it is, the second aspect is that the whole kind of like training process is expensive, and you need a lot of resources to do that, right? Like, because you're literally building GPT itself under your own kind of like infrastructure, right? And you're just like putting the very cherry top on top of it. So that's, in my opinion, is probably not the most economical sense. And even if you do that, you still need to do a lot of prompt engineering to make sure that, hey, it only talks about your data, right? Um, so that's why this last architecture, or probably, well, not last, but second to the last architecture, is probably something that's more into my liking, which is called semantic kernel. Um, and I believe in, like, I'm a bit biased because I'm a developer at heart. Semantic kernel is more developer-ish approach rather than the rest, which kind of like needs a bunch of like data science and like aspect around it. So semantic kernel basically means that, hey, it can analyze the large volume of data, and but the thing is, you're not kind of like um confined with just GPT itself. It has the capability to actually search the web, look for news articles, look for social media posts, and kind of like extract meaningful insights, right? And then from there you can kind of like create and enhance search capabilities, right? So and probably what I like about semantic kernel is it's probably the only approach that's very C sharp and .NET friendly, mainly because it's being pioneered or being kind of like forefront by Microsoft. So yeah, so probably look out more about this space with semantic kernel. Maybe in the future I can talk about semantic kernel in detail, but I think this is an emerging pattern that might be a really good contender where this is going, because the way to put it is that it's kind of like creating a just like what Brian showed earlier with API management. This is kind of like that, right? It's kind of like the aggregate or like the gateway of a prompt, right? Like, hey, I asked something, this acts as a gateway, and like, under the hoods, you can kind of like orchestrate the different ways of where you're getting the data, what kind of like filtering capabilities you're gonna do, right? So that's why I think semantic kernel is a really kind of like long-term approach, an enterprise approach. However, something that's more popular these days is this concept of LangChain. Well, full disclosure, this is not related to blockchain, which is something I've been passionate about as well, especially in the past. But well, it is kind of like related to blockchain in a way that it's a decentralized platform, right? But the whole idea of LangChain on its own is about it's kind of like creating the chain of thought reasoning around it. So there you go, right? Like the whole idea of LangChain is that um, you kind of like create multiple chains of prompts, and like from each and every one of them, you're actually that is the way you train your kind of like model, right? Like, hey, this is GPT. Now you use LangChain to kind of like create a train of thought reasoning about how this could be. So what this means is that instead of actually fine tuning your LLM, meaning putting your data into your large language model such as GPT, um, what it does is that, hey, GPT, let's start from where you are. I'll ask you question number one. Give me an answer. Then, I'll push it just forward until like question number N, like, to 100 or something, right? Like maybe not 100, but, couple of stuff, a couple of sequence of questions, right? And then based from a very well questioned model or a very well questioned chat GPT, now, whenever someone asks something that's related to what you're intending it to be, then it becomes smarter or more context aware about the question, right? So, like for example, you can start with, what is the price of Microsoft stock yesterday, or like someone can just keep on do a chain of thought reasoning around that, and then it becomes a more up to date information that whenever you actually ask questions, it becomes more context aware, right? Cool. All right, now let's talk about implementations and frameworks. So, one, just like what I told earlier, right? Like, this is a concept of using Azure Cognitive Search and GPT at the same time. You can see here with OpenAI and Cognitive Search. This on its own is what we call RAG, or which is the concept of it's similar. It's a subset of semantic kernel, which basically means that um, RAG stands for retrieve, augment, and generate, right? So what this means is that with RAG, you can retrieve data from cognitive search, then augment, like, hey, you want to augment that data, right? Like whatever you've gotten. Now talk to GPT, generate the result for you. Okay, so I think this is that's why I think semantic kernel works, because this app server, that's where you'll be hosting your semantic kernel, because that kind of like approach, you're kind of like aggregating the best of both worlds, right? So the thing with, if you want to use it for robo advisory, right? The limitation of using GPT just for stocks or robo or financial advisory purposes is that again, it's only limited until the September 2021 data set, right? However, with cognitive search, that means you need to put in your actual data in here, right, to kind of like get up to date information and more context awareness about the data. But with RAG, right, you can kind of like, hey, use cognitive search to retrieve the up to date information or relevant information, but you still want to leverage GPT and Chat GPT to actually create a proper kind of like wording, the word generation aspect instead of just returning a table or returning a JSON data or something, right? So you can kind of like create the best of both worlds. Um, so yeah, if you look at the example from Microsoft with Azure Search Open AI demo, like one example that they keep on popping up is that for insurance companies, like that's when someone asks, does my plan cover annual eye exams, then this information, right, was retrieved from that benefit options to that PDF, from the Azure cognitive search capability. It was able to pull down that PDF file, but then still with using GPT, right, it was able to generate this kind of like non-robot-ish or non-scripted-ish type of response. So and then there's, because you're using Chat GPT, you can actually chain it with saying, hey, how about hearing? Then because you did ask in the first question about the plan, for a cover, right? For the insurance, then when you ask Chat GPT with hearing too, right? So it's context aware that, hey, you're still asking about insurance, or I mean you're still trying to ask about covers, right? So that's why it prompts, like, hey, these two different PDFs using cognitive search, and yeah, like a GPT type response in there, right? Now, um, one other approach around this as well is that instead of actually talking directly through a RAG type of approach, right? Or the augmentator kind of like capability. You can also introduce API management first in the middle, so that, hey, you can be more aware if it's a question being asked from mobile or from desktop, right? Because that on its own is kind of like very important. And not just that, right? Like you can do a bunch of kind of like filtering already, or caching, or kind of like um, like um, traffic management at this point in time, even before you do RAG, right? Because the thing is, once you do RAG, and by the way, one important aspect of Open API as well is that there's a payment across the concept of tokens, and like whenever you actually prompt Open API, it's still, I mean, centavos wise, but it's still costly compared to just, hey, retrieve a data from your database, right, or from your cognitive search. So and then from there you can actually like do two things at once. We're in like query and prompt together, right? All right, so here's a demo of um, OpenAI in Azure. So first things first, you need to actually kind of like register for Azure OpenAI. There's a whitelist thing at the moment, so it's not open to everyone. But once you've been whitelisted, it becomes available to your subscription. And then from there, they have a concept of this OpenAI Studio, which is again very Azure-ish, to that allows you to kind of like experiment with OpenAI, with ChatGPT models, completions and stuff like that. So many things you can do. But the good thing, that one good thing about the Studio as well is that it also creates this kind of like sample code for you that would give you, hey, this is how you implement it in Python, in C Sharp, or stuff like that. But again, with OpenAI Studio, you can actually go direct from the studio to actually test it, on your own. Then the other thing as well is that with OpenAI Studio, you have multiple model support. So it's like you might be seeing like, hey, is it GPT-4, GPT 3.5 Turbo? So a bunch of different stuff. Then obviously in the future we have GPT-5. Then we will also have that option, right? Yeah, there you go, right? Like for example, give me an example of companies in 2020 that had the highest increase in sales, right? Um, so if and you can actually kind of like put it in JSON or put that in sample code as well. Then yeah, what's important is the endpoint and the API key, right? So because with that, right, you can actually use Swagger or kind of like different API testing tool for that. So yeah, like with Swagger, you can put in the messages. So by the way, one thing about this is that you can actually preload messages already with ChatGPT. So let's say, earlier, right, like with the chain of thought reasoning, you can have like multiple existing conversations already in there that kind of like guides the request as well. So you see it's a bit slow in terms of like retrieving that information because there are two ways to actually approach this. It's either you want to do it through a stream, meaning like like just like in ChatGPT, like it's spitting out like type per type, kind of like wording, or you also have the capability to just wait until the response is finished and serve it back, right? So that's probably one design consideration that you also have to consider when dealing with OpenAI. Okay. So that's just that in terms of like OpenAI and the way they've kind of like incorporated it into an API. So that means that if you have any backends or even front ends, but probably I wouldn't advise really for a mobile app to directly or like the web front end to directly communicate with OpenAI API. So I mean, obviously, that's literally like that's not much filtering option capability in there, right? Like someone can just ask anything and like or someone can just spam the network or like keep on asking question, and that incurs cost, right? So that's why I think, in my opinion, having a kind of like reverse proxy or like a router or like a traffic manager in the front is the best way to approach this. This one is cognitive search, wherein you just go to Azure as well. Wherein from there you just create a cognitive search resource. Then once the resource is created, you can actually also go to their portal. I mean, from the Azure portal, you can actually import or connect your own data in there, right? So like, hey, I want to connect to a SQL database, or hey, I want to connect to a Cosmos DB. So there you go, right? Like it's all plug and play in the cognitive search land. Yeah. So yeah, you can choose which region you want to use. All right. Once it's deployed, yeah, there you go. So within cognitive search as well, you have a bunch of like capabilities in there wherein you can kind of like extract key phrases, or are you looking at extracting, the whole document, or are you, like do you want to just extract people's names? So like this kind of like creates the index for you so that your search becomes very effective, right? So that's one advantage of using cognitive search instead of like create, like, hey, why do I need cognitive search if I can just set up my whole elastic stack search wherein I search my whole kind of like database, right? Well, this has all of those filtering and indexing capability ready made for you as a SaaS. So that's one key advantage of why you would probably use cognitive search. Right, there you go. So basically, from the portal, you have the search explorer that kind of like, hey, this is like the endpoint, and like you have the query string that would give you like, hey, here the search that I'm looking for, search query I'm looking for, and then it's gonna spit out that kind of like information for you, right? Yeah. So you see there's a bunch of different kind of like options in there as well, such as the scoring profiles, wherein like whenever someone tries to do a search, you can actually score them on how relevant they are. So that's kind of like one way of like training cognitive search that, hey, if someone asks about insurance, then these are probably the right type of answer to look at. Okay. So like that basically means that, hey, for example, if you have your kind of like local again in the context of advisory, right? Like if you're looking for um streets within like the real estate, so you can actually search for street, and then from your database, right, you can actually give proper results. And like there's a bunch of different like queries capabilities on the left that would actually allow you to search within all those documents, right, on all those databases for you. All right, so you don't actually need to create your own, yeah, kind of like searching capability. And then again, right, because of this approach, you don't actually need GPT itself, to actually, hey, train your own data, right? Like, sorry, train your own GPT model with your own data, right? Because it's not very efficient and might as well just do it from my own database. But where GPT would still shine is that, hey, GPT can create the English like or the chat GPT chat like kind of like interface or capability for you, right? All right. Lastly, so how do you actually kind of like put two and two together? So this is like a simple app that we've done. So it kind of like creates a risk profile for you, right? And those kind of like risk profile, right? Um, what happens behind the scene is that they're all kind of like stored in the database already. So like, hey, am I conservative or an aggressive kind of like investor? And like I also have my kind of like portfolio in there, and like it basically it's all the private information, or at least private in the regards that this is identifiable as MJ, is stored within the database, right? Within the app's database, right? So it's not actually shared to ChatGPT itself, right? However, you can still use ChatGPT to actually kind of like create a kind of like pseudo advice for you, right? That kind of like forms that response or that kind of like recommendation in an English like manner, but is context aware from your own data, right? So one more example is that I'm advanced and like I have to put in, like different kind of like um, information about me. Like I'm putting some employment status, like investment goals, investment horizon, and stuff like that. Like, what am I looking for? Do I want to avoid guns, avoid tobacco, and all those kind of like different kind of like um, sectors and stuff like that. Then now you also have capability to looking for to explore, or are you looking for to match existing? Yeah, so there you go, right? Like it creates a more context aware kind of like setting for you, because you're trying to mix the best of both worlds, like doing a proper search within your own kind of like data, but also serving it in a very natural language approach, right? So with that, that kind of like ends my presentation. But then again, right, I want to end in a way that's saying that all of these are still kind of like emerging, and again, my personal take is that RAG and semantic kernel might be the way on how this would approach. Like in the end, the developers still mostly win because they're the one who's kind of like creating the bespoke solutions for specific business needs, instead of like having just one AI, one giant LLM, one giant GPT LLM that solves all the problems in the world. I hope it does, but it doesn't. Um, yeah, so I think having the pattern of like the semantic kernel, or like RAG, uh, would be the approach that I would be kind of like betting at the moment. Um, yeah, so the benefits of Azure AI and semantic kernel is that it improves decision making, and yeah, I think one very important thing that I think would make this successful is because semantic kernel approach is very scalable, right? Because again, you don't have to spam the GPT model time and time again because you're actually augmenting it things properly. However, Azure OpenAI itself, watch out for build. There will be a lot of announcements in there, but there will be, there is already a lot of integration capabilities and customization options around there. But in my opinion, right, just like how you decide which database to use, whether you want to use NoSQL or SQL or like relational database, right? The answer would always be it depends. And most of the time, one technology and one platform or one service or one application is usually just a subset of the whole solution, right? So that's why solutions architect would still have a lot of jobs to do because they still, because one platform or one technology doesn't solve the business problem from day one, or like that doesn't solve everything, right? So in my opinion, OpenAI service would be like a very powerful kind of like capability that a lot of enterprises will be using in the coming months and years to come. Um, and it's gonna be more empowered when it's more context aware about their own data, right? And it's more related to their own data, and that's for me is probably the reason why it's gonna be very impactful. Yeah, like there's a bunch of benefits as well of using LangChain. It's probably the most cost effective um, approach at the moment if you're solely like looking just on the GPT approach. And if you're very kind of like more into the data science side, LangChain is kind of like a very emerging and very kind of like winning approach already. However, prompt engineering one way or the other would still kind of like work. But fine tuning chat GPT or fine tuning LLMs based from your own data set, maybe it might work, but I don't know. Like my initial key takeaway is that it's not working on what I want it to be. So we'll see. So with that, if you have any questions, please do let me know. And again, it's a very interesting time to learn about this because there's a bunch of opportunities out there. Like maybe someone can create a Java wrapper about LangChain or semantic kernel, right? Or you want to use Go about stuff like that. So you want to create a NuGet package around this, or maybe you want to use caching technology plus ChatGPT, right? Like with Redis and like ChatGPT. So maybe you want to consider using like in-memory cache within the device itself about previous response prompts, and then that on its own would run its own kind of like chain of reasoning approach, and then maybe you just do a Google search or like a search capability. So yeah, there's so much more kind of like open kind of like approach with this at the moment, and we're just talking about text or content text at this point. And I mean, the more exciting stuff that's also happening in generative AI space is image generation, video generation, music generation, voice generation, a bunch of stuff, right? So yeah, with that, I'll end my talk, and if there are questions, I'm happy to answer them. You're in mute, Marilag.
Yeah. Classic. Thank you so much, Michael. Very, very, very insightful. Do you have, if you have any questions, for those of you who are watching us on Facebook and YouTube, please post your question in the comment section, and then we're gonna try to push it here at our live stream so Michael can answer them while he's here. What time is it there in Sydney, Michael? Lost
It's
track of time.
8:15 p.m.
8:15. Did you eat your dinner yet, or are we hijacking your dinner?
No, all good, all good. Yeah, we already ate.
Good. It's back in Manila, so they have just finished dinner there, and then they're going on to the next session, also about I think Azure PaaS services.
Mm.
But I don't see any questions yet from our audience. Well, I mean, I would be very honest and probably not the best qualified to ask you questions at the moment because I'm still starting, my journey in AI and open AI as well. And
Yeah,
maybe one thing that I'd like to ask, so it's not very technical, but more kind of practical business. You're a businessman, I'm a businesswoman. We know this space. You're a startup, you need to build a very revolutionary application. Do you bake OpenAI and Azure OpenAI services or cognitive services already now in your MVP? Or should you wait? And where would you be? Like, how would you transition?
yeah. All right. So here's the problem with that, right? And by the way, this is not exclusive to OpenAI and like this kind of like space, right? Um, Time and time again, if your application or if your startup is built on top of an API, right? I do remember back in the days, people creating apps that consumes Netflix APIs, consumes Bing Google search APIs and stuff like that. But where are they now? Right? They're dead. So that's why I think if your startup alone is like, hey, I want to build something on top of Open AI API. I think that's not the right approach, right? So I mean, with startups and businesses, you should focus on again solving the hardest questions or the hardest problems, and then empowering it with technology. But what I would suggest, right, is look at one of these patterns that might work, right? Because the thing is, um, and always think and treat open AI API or any API really as just a component of the whole solution, right? So that means like, hey, I want to be, let's say I want to create an app that's about agriculture, right? Like let's say smart farming agriculture capabilities or something like that, right? Open API, Open AI API alone can't solve that, right? You probably still need a bunch of IoT sensors in there to enrich your data. Then but with Open AI API, you can now use a large language model to actually, hey, here's the data set that we have from for my farm, right? This is the current scenario of my farm. Now create your prompt or create your kind of like feed to open AI, and then it becomes better in terms of like, hey, this is like your co-pilot in terms of like analyzing that data for you, right? So I think those kind of like co-pilot capabilities within open AI are like the really good use cases of this, right? Like you're not fully dependent on open AI itself, but it's more like, hey, an assistant for you, right? So that's why I mean Microsoft themselves they're incorporating OpenAI or GPT technologies across everywhere, right? Like with 365, with Dynamics, with Power Apps and everything, and that's kind of like the clear use case and kind of like the clear startup opportunity here, right? Anything that's co-pilot capability, that is probably like a good use case rather than like saying, hey, I wanna create a chat GPT but for just that, right? So
Yeah, thank you so much for that advice. That's very valuable for people because, yeah, to stay away from being fully dependent in this, especially in this emerging tooling, right? So I guess a good test case for you in your MVP is that if I do remove this component, like your interface, if you must call it, or if I replace it with something else other than this open AI API. It's so confusing. I know people just say open API because that's also another term. Yeah, but open AI API or anything else, will I still be able to give value if I start small? Will it still give value? And I think the most important thing also, one of the key takeaways I got from your talk is that when you combine the cognitive search as also you're searching your entire data, your entire spectrum of what do you call this? Like all different data sources. So that is the kind of the core of your solution. So that means if your data is not clean at all, is not valuable, then you won't get anything out of it, right? You can have the, yeah, advantage of an LLM. Sure, it can talk to you nicely or politely or whatever kind of attitude it has, but if it doesn't have a good basis, then what's the point? So that means the developers of the actual transaction systems, the classic developers that are building the forms that, captures the data and put it into the system, is still very, very important in my book.
Yeah. I mean, it's been the problem since 2012, right? Like when big data came into being, and like no one can define what is big data. Is it at 2 GB data, or at 2 TB data, or at 2 ZB data? What is big data, right? Like, why do I need to use Hadoop, right? Like, but all I do is like, it's just one CRUD application that does store transactions, right? Um, so yeah,
Mm.
it's the problem, right? Like, like if the data doesn't make sense, you can just kind of like make it fancier in a way that's it's being responded, but it's gonna provide really good business value.
Yeah. I have some other questions. I know our next speaker is already, oh, well, I think he's going to be back. But I just have a few questions for you, maybe a little bit more on the meta level, right? So, I love languages. I try to learn the English language, and there's a lot of nuances in language, and that's very hard even for our human brain to capture. So when someone talks to you, your reply might be different. If you're talking to someone else, you kind of mirror each other. Is this something that you expect from an LLM, that it does actually notice these nuances in your behavior, you as a human being, and then adjust its response based on that? Or is it very generic, or where are we right now?
Right. Yeah, yeah. So very, very good question. And it's very timely because like we talk about this all the time, right? Like I mean, for the past 2 weeks in my kind of like group as with solutions architect, we talk about this all the time. Um, because GPT and Chat GPT is kind of like commoditized now as a kind of like technology. The teachers and some educators who are already exposed with this, and like actually in the company that I'm consulting at the moment, the HR people are now very trained about ChatGPT, that they know that if someone creates a cover letter that was created by ChatGPT, they would know in one glance, right? Like, it starts with, oh, blah, 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 do this, it does that, that. It's so generic that, like, because you've seen like 100, 200 of those cover letters created by ChatGPT, you're kind of like training your brain that, hey, you know this came from ChatGPT, right? And then it always ends with a, in summary, it does that, 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 that. So it's like it's clicking onto you that it's created by ChatGPT, right? So that's why the opportunity around that are the prompt engineers for actually creating the personas and creating the filters and creating the character about how do you actually use ChatGPT, right? Like someone who literally just asks, create a story about a penguin and a horse, right? Like it's gonna create a generic story about penguin and a horse. But someone who is a really good prompt engineer, or like as we call them, wizards, right? You're actually gonna put substance about that story. Where in like, hey, a penguin who's struggling to find his mother, or like a horse who's actually like looking for a purpose in his life. That kind of like creates a different kind of like more dynamic type of storyline, right? And that is the opportunity there of prompt engineers, where in like you don't just create a story about the penguin and a horse. You actually create the substance about what the story is. So I think that's the emerging kind of like pattern, or emerging kind of like capability or opportunity I'm seeing at the moment, right? Because everyone's just like lazy, like, hey, generate a cover letter for me, like copy paste their job description, generate a cover letter. But the HR people, they're kind of like trained with this thing now. Like they see hundreds of this every day, and like, oh, this is from GPT. This came from GPT. Even without using GPT checker, they would know already, because they're exposed to this all the time. So yeah.
All right. So really exciting time for developers. You don't only need to be very technical. You also need to be very creative, and start becoming a storyteller or a writer. So that actually inspired me. Now, I thought before, oh my gosh, it's another thing to learn. I'm getting too old for this. But now the way you put it, I'm actually super interested to get back on the horse and learn a little bit more about LLM and open AI. So thanks for inspiring us today, Michael. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for your time. And I'm sure this is not the last. And thank you for supporting our community
Mhm.
all the time.
Maybe in a few months I can talk about semantic kernel in more detail, right? Because yeah, it's something I'm closely watching at the moment, and I think yeah, like maybe in few months time this becomes the thing, right? This becomes the container app kind of like approach or something like that. So we'll see.
Pretty sure, yeah. A lot of things have changed. That's why it's tricky to talk about this topic nowadays because, as you have mentioned, things are changing all the time. So it's hard to keep up. But we understand, we, your audience, understand, and we get a lot out of it. So thank you so much for walking us through, and see you in a couple of months with
Yes.
the next update. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. All right, thanks for joining us. We are almost at the end of our live stream session while the in-person session at Microsoft PH is still ongoing with the last speaker out there. You can also join that one using the Teams link that I have on the comment. But if you want to stay with us and learn about how to secure your Azure functions using Microsoft Identity, then stay tuned, stay with us. And if you're at it, please do give us your feedback. Use this QR code and just tell us about your experience so that we can improve our events in the future. And also, you can put there other topics that you wish to learn through Azure User Group Manila. So, with that, let's have like just 1 minute stretching break. Grab your favorite cup of drink. I don't have anymore. My coffee's empty, so I hope I am still bearable because it's already 12:30 in Sydney. It's now I say Sydney. See, I don't have enough coffee in Copenhagen. It's a beautiful day. It's a beautiful day in the Philippines, and now we're welcoming soon our next speaker for the day, Jaya Kumar. I hope I pronounced it right. So let's have you on stage. Hello, hi.
Hi, hi, Mela. How are you?
Hi, Jayakumar. Thank you for joining our event, for submitting your session for uh, Global Azure Philippine edition. May I ask, where are you at the moment? Where in the world are you?
Yeah, actually, I'm from India, so I'm in southern part of India, so somewhere near Coimbatore, a city called Coimbatore.
That's nice. I bet it's hot there right now, or
Yeah, it's always mostly it's hot here, and the climate is also like that. So yeah,
yes. Well, I was just in the Philippines a couple of weeks ago, and I was enjoying the weather there because in Copenhagen it's already mid-spring, and actually since yesterday it's summer has started, so I'm enjoying that. But now I can't go outside because I'm sitting here hosting this event. Yeah,
uh,
I love
you're
it.
almost done.
Well,
Yeah, yeah,
thank you again for joining us. Then I'll give you the stage if you can share your screen, please. Then I will put it up.
sure. Thank you. Let me share the screen. Yeah,
All right, Azure Identity Management. I'm also very interested with this topic. And earlier today, we also had another topic about Azure Functions and also a little bit on how to manage and securing that with API management. And this is a different take on it using the Identity Azure AD. So take it away, Jayakumar.
thank you. Thanks for giving me the stage. So welcome everyone. So joining this session on this wonderful evening for me, maybe some noon for you guys. So today we'll be exploring how we are going to secure the Azure functions in different ways. And along with that, how we are going to enable that using the identity management, and Azure Active Directory apps to ensure the secure transactions between your function apps and your client services. So let's get into that. So before that, a slight intro about myself. So myself, Jay Kumar Balasubramaniam. So I work as work in Accountsbook Digital, a company located in Norway, and I'm from Bangalore actually. So I'm a certified developer, certified professional blogger. Yes, you know all these things. So these are my social media handles. You can reach out to me whenever you want if you have any queries. Yeah, let's get into the session. So securing Azure functions, that's our core concept today we have taken, right? So as you know that the Azure functions, it's mostly related to Azure app services, because Azure app services provides all the infrastructures that your function app needs. Function app is not, even you go with consumption plan or app service plan or anything, Azure App Service supports on its back by providing their infrastructure. So so basically, whatever the security mechanisms or security related stuff that you are able to do on your Azure App Service, you should be able to do on your Azure Function App as well. So we are going to see some of the options that is available and some of the best practices on the Azure functions that you can follow, and enabling the identities uh, to ensure that. So basically, the Azure here are the few compliance checks that usually Azure App Service will go through. So that means in Azure Function also will go through to ensure that all your resources that you create are secure from the other Azure resources, even it's from a different customer, or even if it is from your different tenant, or you have some different resource groups or whatever. It always ensures that security and all the communications, such as the connection strings that you pass between your Azure resources and or the any secrets, that all are encrypted and stored. So whatever the kind of connections that you make to your Azure function, either via a PowerShell or Azure CLI or SDK or STP, everything is completely encrypted. And there is a 24-hour threat management protect policies for running in Azure, so which always helps you to protect you from the malware attacks and denial of service attacks and all the man in the middle attacks, all the kind of the very famous attacks, that it all protects your services by default. So these are the things that provided by Azure as a service provider on its own, as a security things that they have. But apart from that, as a customer, what we can do to secure our Azure service and do our transaction securely is what we're going to see now. So, and there is a Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark. So, which says what are the things that you can do on your Azure function at the function app level, and what are the security mechanisms that are enabled by default, as we see now, and what are the security things that you can do on your as a customer on your own, whether you want or don't want, based on your application requirement or your customer requirement, anything you can decide. So let's see some of the security benchmarks that is available to understand the security protocols that are available for us. So basically, the security profile of this Azure function is, yeah, yeah, let me take. So it's basically a compute-based services. As you know, it's a serverless component. So it is a web-based thing. So, and either whether you are the customer can host the infrastructure in the back or OS in the back, it cannot be done because it's owned by the Microsoft. And whether it can provide any virtual network for your Azure functions, yes, it definitely can provide. And whether it stores all your customer data at rest, yeah, obviously as an Azure service provider, even the Azure function stores some of your customer data at the rest. And coming to the security and the network related things, so Azure function provides a virtual integrations, Azure private link, and your AD authentication can be enabled. And if you want any keyword based storage or any other security mechanisms, everything is supported by Azure function, but it will not be enabled by default. You have to enable it on your own as a customer, so based on your requirements that you have. And next, coming to the anomaly detections, whether the data that is being transacted between your Azure function and your customer or a client, whether any data will be monitored or not, or like kind of targeting the sensitive data, those kind of stuff will not be done. It is not even enabled by default, and it's not supported as well. But encrypting the sensitive data in the transit, that is possible, because when you transfer the data, only the thing is the Azure will not monitor that, but it will ensure that data is secured in a encrypted way, in a secured way, so that you can be very safe when you do transactions. So, and at the same time, if there is any data at the rest, like your application configurations, or if there is any your function code, or if there is any security mechanisms that you have enabled, everything will be encrypted by default at the resource level itself. You don't need to do anything for that data that is at rest with the Azure function. But only thing is that if you want to, if there is any data is done in the transit, then that we can enable the encryption by our configuration. And there are a few more things that you can consider when you go for the security for the Azure function. So let's say that that there is a Azure Defender's Cloud Defender is available. Basically, it is a free and it's a quick assessment of your Azure functions. It by default it evaluates all the security vulnerabilities of your Azure function, basically for all the Azure resources, and Defender is available for the Azure function as well. And by default there is a log and monitor is available, so basically you can go and check which using the application insights or any default Azure monitoring kind of stuff. You can consolidate all the logs, and you can check whether you have any security leaks or any security threats that has happened to your application or your Azure function when you do the transactions. And you can use the HTTPS function. You might have seen by default this HTTPS, yeah, but in Azure function, in Azure App Service, you might have seen this enabling the HTTPS. Same kind of stuff you can enable in your Azure function as well. So let me show that in real quick. So when you go to the Azure function app in your authentication site, in your custom domains, you can basically enable whether you want to allow the applications to be only HTTPS enabled. Like let's say that you are using your HTTP based trigger, you can enable that, and you can only request for the HTTP based authentication instead of HTTPS based authentication. And the next comes with the function keys. So the function keys are the most used uh, keys that are used to access your Azure functions. Like there are different levels based on the authorization scopes. Either you can have the function level, or you can have the host level, or even the master key. The function level is something, those keys allows you to access the functions, only the specific functions. It will not be able to use the same key to access the different function on the same function. But if you take into a host level, and this host level will allow you to access the any function within your function app, so that you'll be able to have a single key to access all the functions. And the master key is something similar to the host level, but the major one difference is like it allows you to access some privileged permissions on your function app, like maybe enabling the authentications or authorization, enabling the cards, or doing some Kudu services. So all those things it will be able to do because it has some privileged permissions. But ensure when you use this master key, it's advisable to not use this master key when you from your client side code. When you expose that to the customer, it's better to go with function or host level. And here is a short comparison map of about the same function keys. So when you take a function key, it just executes a specific function, so it only depends on that function. And if you take into an account of host keys, it can execute any function within that function app. And if it is a master key, it can call on any kind of admin endpoints, like to do some of the admin tasks using the REST APIs. That can also be possible. And there is another key called system based key, so which helps you to access some of the external webhooks and other tasks, extension APIs, which is for the durable task. So let me show you that. You might just seen this, like when you go and see a function, you can yeah, let's take this http trigger function, so where you can find a simple http function that I created. My network is a little bit slow. Yeah. Or okay, I can take show it from here. So if you look at here, you can see the function level keys here. So the default is the function key. So there are two more keys like master key or the default master key which I talk about, and the default host key. So there are two default keys. One is for function and one is for host. This is what the keys we talk about, which you can use to authenticate your function app and make the rest of other calls. Now coming to the secret repository. So you might have noticed where all these keys are get stored. You have your master key, you have your default function key, or you have your system key, where all these keys get stored in your function. So you don't see that here. It's stored in a storage account by default. When you create your function, you might have noticed there is a thing called Azure Web Job Storage, which gets added in your local settings or even your Azure function app settings. So by default, the storage used to store all these keys is Azure Web Storage, like basically the storage account. And if you want to change it to different storage based on your convenience or based on your application requirement, also you could do that. So these are the different values that you can use. So you can change the storage account type. In the same configuration, you can add one more configuration to Azure Web Job Storage type, and where you can mention the value as blobs or files or key vault. And if you're using the blob, you can go with this is your configuration where you can mention your blob connection string. And if you go with the key vault, this is your key vault URI where you can mention your key vault URI. And Kubernetes also, you can mention the Kubernetes name, where you want to maintain your Kubernetes secrets in your Azure function. So that is also possible. And next, coming to the authentication or authorization, which we are going to see majorly today, like the function keys. Just now we discussed the function keys. It just provides some level of security, and it helps to mitigate your unwanted access or unauthorized access to your function app. But in real time, like the true way to secure a function app is to enable identity based authentication either by any of the identity providers that Microsoft supports in its Azure function. So that you can ensure that user level permission, the basically why we are the keys that you mentioned, it the key can be leaked out by any means, and the key is common for every users. Like let's say you have 100 users, all your 100 users going to access your same key. And there may be a chance that it may get leaked out. So that to avoid that level of security threat, so we have identity based authentication. So the Azure app and the Azure function app and the Azure app service app supports many identity providers by default. So you can use these are the services for now. So previously there was only Microsoft, Facebook, Google, and Twitter. Now even they have added Apple-based identification or authentication you can do, and even OpenID Connect based authentication also you can do. Even the GitHub is all the things newly added. I hope some other things will also come in the near future. So you can use any of this kind of authentication to ensure that your function app is being called from only the uh, authorized resources, even at the user specific level. And you can even use that user information to for any of the purpose in your function code. Yeah, so basically the main thing is about the next is managed identity. So the managed identity, the identity based identity management, it helps to communicate between different Azure resources in a secure way without even providing any of the sharing any of the credentials. Just by enabling your identity, you can do that. So basically, that I will show you how to do that in a minute when we go for a demo. So basically there are two types of identities, like system assigned identity, which is tied to our application. So that means like your function app will have its own identity, and it can have its own permissions, and it can you can allocate any level of permission to that identity, and your function app can interact with other Azure resources by using that identity. So the system assigned identity is kind of tightly coupled. So as soon as you delete your function app, the identity also gets deleted, and you can have only one system identity for one app. The user identity is something different, so you can have multiple user identities for an app, and again, which works in the same way to authenticate your other Azure resources, so that you can, let's say that I can tell an example. Suppose you have your Azure, uh, we have seen now you can manage your secrets, you can manage your secrets in your Azure Key Vault or Azure Storage account, and if you don't want to store that key vault secrets in your Azure function app, you can better store it in your Azure key vault credentials. Let's say that you don't want to save your connection strings or any passwords, any email passwords that you want to use. You don't want to save in your function app. You can better save it in the default secure store in the Azure Key Vault, and you can establish the connection between both the Key Vault and your Azure function by using these identities. And there is one more level of security. Again, these are all the different levels of security mechanisms that we can use to ensure that our application is secure. You can use the restrict CORS access. Basically, there is a CORS policy also you can enable on your Azure services, so that you can avoid the cross domain request from the different domains which is not authorized for you, and you can restrict that as well. Again, managing the secrets, which I given an example now. Let's say that you want to manage that connection string or any secrets, you can use the Azure keywords, and you can establish the communication between both your function app and that Azure keyword using a managed identity. And the next one is you can set the usage quotas. Let's say that you're using the consumption plan. So if you set some storage or execution quotas, so the functions will not execute after that limit, so that you can, because when you go with the consumption plan, you know that you will be consuming only this much level of function executions. Let's say you will assuming that you're having only 100 executions, maybe you can target it for 150. And so if you set the quota as 150 executions for a day, then it will not execute more than 150 executions for a day, so that you can avoid any kind of malicious attacks or denial of service attacks, those kind of stuffs when it comes to your quota based plans. The next one is the data validation. So you know the triggers and the bindings, whatever that you use, be it a http trigger or storage account or any blobs or any kind of triggers, the data will not be validated on its own. You just send the trigger data to your function code from the triggered service to your function code. You just need to ensure that you are validating the data, whether it's coming from the right source, or whether the request headers are proper, or whether the values are coming the proper, or everything you just need to validate. And it's also best to ensure handling the errors. You can handle the errors and log it in your application insights or Azure Logs and Monitor Analytics. So you can use this to capture your errors. And the remote debugging. So you know that Azure App Service allows the remote debugging. So as a developer, you should be able to debug your function which is running in the live by checking if there is any problem or something. It's purely for the developer thing, but it's always better to disable this thing and do not enable this unwantedly. So which helps you to secure our function apps. Deployment credentials. So as you know that there is a kudu services, and when you deploy something to your Azure function app, you can enable the deployment credentials so that it can be secured. Anyone cannot deploy, and they need a deployment credential informations to move something to your Azure function, so that you don't end up with some malicious code being published to your Azure function. And disabling the FTP based access, so that you don't want to allow file transfer based protocols, so that the files are easily transferred. And you know there is an SCM endpoint with the kudu services. Let me show you that as well before I go. So by default, as I said that Azure function is the infrastructure for this is backed by the Azure App Service. So where you will have the kudu services for Azure App Service, where you can manage your console kind of thing for your Azure App Service. Same kind of thing available for your Azure Function App as well. Let's. So when you search for advanced tools, and you can find here the service called, this is called that service where you can manage. Yeah, this is queue services where your application files will be hosted. Actually, this is your kind of an FTP based things where you can uh, access your file storage for related to your Azure function. It's same like the Azure App Service that you see. You can have all your functions, whatever the functions that you create, you will have your folder over here. So you can restrict the access to these services as well by enabling some authentication mechanisms on that. This is called SCM endpoint. If you look at the URL, so this is with comes with SCM. So the SCM endpoint can also be encrypted. So now let's see some of the demo of the services that we see now on the identity management, and how do you enable the authentication by using the identity providers that we see. And let's see how all these things works. So I have, as you know, that you can just go and create a function app here. I have already created a function app. So let me proceed with that itself. So, and I will show you the same option. So you see the and as I told, this the function app will have cost as well, same like Azure App Service. If you want to restrict any service, or if you want to just allow one specific service, the application transaction hits from the specific domains, you can just mention your domains here, so that it will be secured by default. And the identity management, the next one. So before that, the configuration. So the configuration is about the application setting. So let me open up that. So the configuration, here you see the Azure Web Job Storage. This is what we talk about. If you want to, let's say that this is a connection string and you want to manage this in your key vault, you can manage it. And even if you want to change this storage, Web Job Storage, to different storage like key vault or any Kubernetes based secrets, or any blob based files, you can do that by using the configuration which we seen in our one of our slide. Sorry. And just enable some authentication. I'm just going to delete it. Yeah. Okay. Now let us talk about some of the identity management things. So every Azure, almost every Azure resource will have their own identity. So which you want to enable on your own, it will not be enabled by default. So it will be turned off. The status will be turned off. This is what I told, like the system assigned and the user assigned. So when you enable a system assigned one, let's say that let me enable the system assigned identity for my Azure app function app. It will create a Azure AD identity in the backend for me, and it will just show me the object ID that I can use. So it's, that Azure Active Directory is some kind of a user management. So where your Azure function app will also be registered as kind of an app user over there, and you can use these object IDs to grant permission. How you grant the permissions, role-based access, or some permissions to your users. You can assign the same kind of permissions to these function app as well. So let's say that this is my object ID, and I just copy this object ID, and I'm just going to my Active Directory. this is my object id I just copied, and it has registered my application as an enterprise application. So this is what my user information for this app. Now, okay, how I can use this identity, system-based identity, the object IDs, to access the other resources. So let me go and create some key vault, for example. Just leave it with the defaults. I don't want to disturb that, as it's just a demo, for a quick demo. I hope it just it deployed some quick. Let's see. Okay, so in the meantime, it's okay. It got deployed. So where, let's say that I have created my key vault. So I want to manage my secret. Uh, Maybe this one. Don't know why it is taking time. Yeah, now it came through. So let me take this thing and let me add as a secret value here. So the entire connection thing, I just copy the complete thing. Forget about the predefined protocols. So if you want to set expiration, just nothing. I just save it here. Okay, function app connection string. So now I'm just going to access this connection string for my Azure app function app from the key vault, and how I'm going to do that. So for that only we are going to use our identity management. So let's take our identity. Yeah, this is our identity. Go to your Azure key vault. Go to the role base. Just go to your access policy section in key vault. By default, I have my access. And here it's I have just added the secret as a secret, not as a key. So let me just use the secret management. I don't want all these things. I just want to get and list. So let me go with that, and next. So now I have to I have to grant permission to the my Azure function app. I just going to use my object ID. So my object ID just came here. Yeah. Now I have just granted the permission. So now next step is to access the secret by using my identity with that permission got enabled. So now let's go to the configuration back. Okay, let's change this. this is the applications that you want to use at Microsoft.key vault, and your param is like vault name equal to your vault name that you are going to use. So this will be your vault name. So this is your vault name. So let me take that down. Yeah, I just need only the name. So I'm removing the default domains, subdomains. Just need the name. Then the next parameter is secret name is my secret name. So this is my secret name. So Microsoft.keyvault name plus the secret name. Just just save it. Yeah. Let me refresh this. The web app settings got saved now. Okay, in the meantime it gets refreshed. Let me go and create one more function. To check about the access keys. So this is HTTP trigger one, which I have already created. Yeah. Okay, this is loaded now. So now if you look at the key vault, the connection string, it is referred from the key vault reference. So by using the identity, managed identity, so I'm accessing the key vault, I mean my connection string from the key vault just without making any connection, without writing any piece of code. It's just establishing the communication and granting the permission to your Azure function app by using the identity. So now let's see the key differences. Let's check the function key and the host key differences now. So let me enable let me create one more HTTP trigger based function. So this is trigger 2 and code plus test. Let me open the other function in the meantime. So this is the default function that got created, right? So I have my code for the default function. So sometimes it takes time to load, so I'm refreshing it. Okay, if you see, this is the function. This I have already copied that code. I don't know, this is taking time to load, but I have already copied my code. Now this just returns. Let me use the same code for the HTTP trigger 2 as well. It will not work because I have used function based key. The scope is restricted only to the that specific function. So now if I try it with a different function, the code will not work. So that's how these things. And if you use the master key or the host key, so where you can access all the functions in your function app with the same code. So that is what the difference between your function key and your host key. Now let's see how we enable that identity provider and how we are going to restrict this access. Let's go to the function again. Now in the authentication section, yeah, one more thing. So you can monitor the logs over here, like the metrics based on the memory usage, whether any request failures or not, and even you can enable the Defender and you can check the security related stuffs. So Microsoft Defender for Cloud is also here, which gives you the security threats for your application where you can take actions against that as well. Okay, now let's go to the authentication. We have accessed our function without any mechanism, right? Just for that only I have opened it in incognito mode. It just returns the result because it's just a HTTP trigger and it works in a by using the get call. Now let me secure my application. This is why I showed if anyone knows this code, anyone can access your application. That's why I said it just mitigates some to the security to some level, but the real true extent of it will be based on your identities and your Active Directory. So let me choose for now, since we're dealing with Microsoft, and let me go with the Microsoft Identity Provider itself, and let's create a new application. I have registered many applications, so let me give it some number. It's number 3 application, and whether I want a single tenant or multi-tenant or Microsoft accounts or anything, I'm going with personal accounts as well because I'm using my personal account and it requires authentication. And here even you can have whether if it is for the websites, you can go with this one because it will default take to uh, the Microsoft site to log in. And if it is the Facebook, by default you can see it will take to the Facebook login because it's just a website. But if it is same, it is an API, you don't need the login, you don't want the login page, right? Just restrict the access. Let me show you both the difference. So for now I'm going with the APIs. Then let me show you, then after I will come to the web app. Okay, now I have enabled the recommended font for APIs, the 301. Next, permissions. Is it dot read add? Okay, sorry, I'm missing something here. Okay, 3. Okay, I have added my identity provider to my function app. Now if I go and try this, it will not work. See, we don't have permission. It will not return the result because it just configured for, it is secure, but it is configured for API. So now let's change this so that it works for the web applications as well. So better I will delete this identity provider and then recreate one more thing. Again, I will go with Microsoft, but this time I will just rename it to 4. I will go with the web-based website thing. Now in the meantime, I don't have authentication enabled, right? So it will work again because I just removed it. It works. Now let me add the identity again based on for the websites. So which takes care all your authentications and the redirections and the token validations, all the client ID secrets, authentication types. Everything will be taken care by its own. So we no need to write any single piece of code. So now it's configured. Now let me go and access the same. Previously, when it's configured for API, it just throws us an error, but now it's configured based for website. so that it redirects to our Microsoft, because we are using Microsoft, so it redirects to the Microsoft thing. So let me log into my account. So, okay, see more. I will go with text. Let me check the code. Just want to log in. 39555658. 555658. Now I just logged in. This is my app name, and it's going to use my basic profile info. And again, if you want, I just accept it. And you see, this is only accessing the basic info, but it also will again. Now we got the result. You see, so this also will be creating an one area up in your Active Directory, and if you want to handle additional levels of permissions by getting the users consent, you can do that by adding the permission. I just enabled only the default permission, that's why we get only the default permission. So this is how we can enable your secure your application by using the identity providers and identity management. So that's it for today. So I hope you have learned something new, not something about the managing the identity and the security related stuffs that you can ensure on your Azure function to have the best application. So thank you for watching. Thanks for your time. So if you have any questions, please do let us know or ping us. You're open for Q&A now.
Thank you so much, Kumar. That was very, very informative. Let's wait for some questions from our audience. If there are any right now, there aren't any, but you have shared your contact information so that if they have any questions or if they're watching the recording later on, they can reach out to you. And I think it's really informative. I work a lot with Azure functions, and these are some of the things that developers ignore when they're building something
Yeah,
with serverless. All the security considerations that you have mentioned are all equally important. And because functions are easy to build, you just spin up
yes,
one, you deploy your code, and then you forget all the other things because now your application is running
right.
fine. That's good. So
How
maybe just
easy the
for
things will become, the we will forget the other stuffs that is around the thing. Yeah, but the core is the app service, so which helps to build any kind of security infrastructure on top of function, same like app service.
Yeah, and it's very serious matters. A lot of people are building just APIs exposed publicly and not really caring about all the
Yeah,
different levels of security. I love that you mentioned also the layers, like even if your topic is only about the identity part, but you touched upon also, let's say, the network security. How often do you see people, putting their
yeah, right,
applications within a VNet? Right? So thinking
right.
about this thing, so I will definitely recommend the recording for this so people can get back just to give an overview of all the things that they can do with the service, with the infrastructure, and which ones to prioritize. Maybe that's my question for you. There are a lot, right? What do you think is the most basic thing that you need to do, that's not set by default, that you have to go in, and when you build something you need to go in and do this first things first, to secure your
Okay.
application?
Yeah, so the first thing I will tell is definitely you need to consider about the identities like managed identity, which we see to securely communicate between your different applications. Like basically, you can store everything in your key vault, even from your function. If you want to access any storage account or blocks, you no need to make every resource will have its own connection string or secret or something to establish the connection, right? To communicate. So all those things you can save securely in a key vault, or you can use the managed identity, or you don't need to save in a key vault. Now there are a lot of options available. You don't forget about the connection string, forget about the key vault secrets, everything from directly from your code. You can access your respective resources. Let's say it's a storage account, or it is a blob, or it's any key vault. Because these identity management can help you to work like a role-based access as well. Not only with the access policies, whatever we see now, it will act like a real user, like how you just log into your browser and you access all of the resources with your single username. Same like that you can do. You don't need to manage any connection string or any key vault. Even in the key vault secret, you don't need to manage your connection strings. Just enable the role-based access by using the identity management and use some security things in your .NET code. You can use that.
Yeah, that's great. So basically, don't let all your confidential information lying open for everybody to
Yeah,
look
I would recommend
into.
using the role-based access thing by enabling the identity management. That's the one that's new thing, and that's a recommended one.
Yeah, that's the best. So before, just to clarify, so before Kivo only use access policies, and then now it's enabled for RBAC. So if your
Yeah,
application has its own identity, you don't need to manage. Let's say some people used to have a uh, service principal that has a client ID
yeah,
and secret, and use that to connect to other resources. But that's
correct.
also a little bit, yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
it can
that is
be,
that
of
also
course,
can be
more.
avoided with this. Yeah,
Yeah, but then you'll have to manage those secrets as well for those service principals. So it's much better
right,
to use, of course, the manage identity and enable that and assign access to that identity over to the other resources. So
right.
yeah, first and foremost. So when do you recommend that you secure the functions on the network layer, for example? Like when do you want it to put within a VNet?
Okay, so when you it's the VNet, it is something about the requirement basically. So if you have some kind of a hybrid network where you are connecting your hybrid like on-premise thing also with the Azure function, it's better to always go with this kind of virtual network. So rather than keeping it open, but when you have everything in the cloud, by default it's secured with your cloud and all those role-based access and all those stuff. So when it's hybrid, it's always better to go with VNet.
Yeah, that's right. That's good. So, for example, if you have Azure functions that connect to a database that is on your
Right,
on-premise that you haven't migrated to the cloud yet, then you need to secure that. You have a VNet and then maybe connect that to the internal network via the gateway and
correct.
this sort of things.
Yeah,
Yeah. All right. That makes, of course, a lot of sense. And yeah, you have mentioned going back to the identity, right? Because now I have mentioned that there is a database in on the cloud. So it's
yeah.
not just Key Vault, you're right? Not just storage. So if you have, Azure SQL also running or Cosmos DB or anything database on the cloud. So, and if you want your functions to access the data plane for those data sources, then you can also use manage identity with RBAC,
Yeah,
correct?
definitely. Yeah, definitely. You can, because as I told, the role-based access, you grant different level of permissions to your users, whether they are a storage administrator, whether they are data administrator, whether they manage the security, all those stuffs. Same levels of access you can give to your function app or app service, anything by using a managed identity. So they can only access the data without any secrets or something. Yeah,
Yes. All right. Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Jayo Kumar, and for
thank
joining the
you.
Filipino community as well, for sharing your knowledge with us, and yeah, and for joining Global Azure. This is happening simultaneously all over the world.
Yeah.
Lots of events. I pity actually the audience because they can't. It's hard to choose which live
Correct. Yeah,
stream.
it's happened at three different, only 3 days. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a lot of content out there. Are you also joining other Global Azure events, or is this the only
Uh,
one?
no, is this the only one? This is the only
Yeah.
one.
All right. Well, thank you so much again, and hopefully we can see you in our community some other time.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. Definitely. Thanks for having me. Thanks for organizing this wonderful event. Thank you. Have a good
Thank
day.
you. You
Bye.
too. Well, we've come to the end of our Global Azure 2023 Manila edition. Thank you for staying with us. Thank you for attending all the sessions. And if you are watching the recording, and I hope you will, there's a lot of content in here. I hope you enjoy it. And if you do have questions to our speakers, I think they have shared their contact information. So you can reach out to them directly. I'm going to try to reach out to them and get their slide deck so that we can upload it somewhere in OneDrive, and then I'm just going to post the links to these slides here in the comment section, or If you are a member of our meetup group at meetup.com for Azure User Group Manila, I'm also going to post that in the comments section. And if you weren't able to catch the online version of our in-person events, I don't know how to put that into words. It's like if you didn't join the team's meet for the in-person event on Microsoft Philippines, we're also going to publish the recording of that event in a couple of days or weeks from now, and it's going to be in our YouTube channel. And there's a lot of great content there as well. So Pio Balisto has talked about extensively about Azure SQL, and then Leslie Canales has talked about her journey in Azure and how she got a lot of certifications in the span of 1 year, which can help you too. And also her journey in Cloud Adoption Framework. And which one's just finished talking about app modernization with Azure Pass. So lots of good things, and I hope you learned a lot. I hope this is the last time that you will join our events. So please do fill up our feedback form in front of you, scan the QR code, and let us know what kind of topics you wish to learn in the future from us. If you are interested in also being one of our speakers and sharing your knowledge, reach out to us. We're really open for more new faces in the community. And I'm sure any experience that you have, and you don't have to be working with Azure for a long time. Maybe you're just started, or maybe it's something that you learned in school. Anything is very valuable for the community. Come and reach out to us and, share. And it doesn't have to be a long session. If you're more comfortable with a shorter session like lightning talks, 20 minutes, we can help you. And if you need help, if you're very interested, I know, because I used to be like this once. I was very, very new to public speaking. I was very, very new to community. So I needed all the help I can get to, to start sharing my knowledge, because the one thing that's constant is that I just want to share my technical knowledge to the community. And if you're that kind of person, but still sort of hesitating and struggling because you don't have any experience, reach out to us. We can help you. We can help you formulate your deck or your talk, your abstract, and practice. But just come to the community and share your knowledge. And hopefully we can host more in-person events in Manila. So if you're there, do join us as well. If you want to volunteer for the community, so maybe speaking is not for you, but then you want to be part of our small community, Azure User Group Manila is always open for volunteers. We need help, a lot of help for organizing our events, for finding speakers, for even keeping our social media accounts active and posting great content. Whatever, you can come and join us, and it's going to be a very fun experience for you. We can guarantee that you will also learn a lot. It's going to be very, very good for your career and to kickstart your professional journey on the cloud in Azure in particular. And we have lots of connections to the other communities in the Philippines, PH Tech community. We're a member of that one. So we're also constantly in touch with other tech communities like AWS, WordPress, Mozilla, and many, many other. .NET user group, of course, run by John Lim Yap. We are very much connected. So we are not an isolated group. So Philippine tech community is very dynamic, very active, very thriving. Come join us. If you belong to a company who wants to help us as well, sponsor us, sponsor our activities, just lend us your space, your venue, give us some food, feed us, reach out to your HR department or to your bosses, and then we're very open. So yes, let's make this is a fun experience for everyone. So thank you so much for joining Global Azure. There are other live streams from all over the world in the next few days until Saturday. Tomorrow, I will be hosting another in-person event, actually, here in Copenhagen. We're hosting one at Mask, the largest or one of the largest shipping companies in the world. It's a whole day event as well. I think it will be recorded, so I'm going to share that to you as well. So you also can learn from, from other experts and tech leads from the different sides of the planet. With that, I want to thank you for joining me today. My name is Marilex Venevig, and thank you, Joanna Hipolito, for running our in-person event at Microsoft, and for the rest of the team there. Thank you so much, and see you again. Bye.